Chapter 22, Jeffrey. I didn't want to be recognized and I wasn't comfortable being completely buck-ass naked, so the first thing I did after I got undressed was head for the shopping deck. I got a ship logo ball cap and a pair of sunglasses, which cost a total of $238.50, which was a complete rip-off in which I charged to the room of Sue and Arnie Cogan. After that, I spent an hour walking around the ship, pretending it was no big deal to be walking naked around a ship full of naked people. In a situation like that, you can't be every 10 seconds pointing at some woman and yelling, "Hey, I can see your vagina," even though that's pretty much all you're thinking. I'm not saying all the women were hot. Some of them, if they fell overboard, they'd be harpooned by Japs, but there's something about a naked woman, any naked woman. Your brain always wants to take a look. Your brain never says, "Nah, I've seen enough naked women for now." After a while, I got thirsty from all that looking, so I found a seat at a bar on the sun deck called the Anemone Lounge, where I had a Heineken, which cost $12, which was picked up by my good friends Sue and Arnie Cogan. I'd been sitting at the bar for maybe 5 minutes when this couple came up to me. She was a blonde, middle-aged woman, but you could see she worked out with a nice fake rack. He was a big guy, some muscle, some fat, very hairy, like he was wearing a full-body sweater. He had on one of those fanny packs, which is a douchebag look even if you're not naked. I had this weird feeling that I knew them, but I just couldn't figure out from where. The rack said, "Mind if we join you?" I shrugged. They sat down. "I'm Charisse," said the rack. "This is Mike." Mike stuck out his hand and we shook, him holding it a little too long, letting me know he had a grip. He said, "Are you enjoying the cruise so far, Jeffrey?" I pulled my hand away. "Do I know you?" I said. "Not yet," he said. "Then how do you know my name?" Cherie smiled and said, "Everybody knows you, Jeffrey." "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have to say," said Mike, "going on a nude cruise, it's a very creative way to hide out." "I'm not hiding out," I said. "No," said Therese, looking straight at my dick. "You're not." "Listen," I said, "I don't know who you think I am, but you're Jeffrey Peckerman," said Mike. "We recognized you when you got on board." He unzipped his waist pack, and for a second there, the way things had been going lately, I thought he was going to pull out a gun. But what he pulled out was an iPhone. He tapped on it for a few seconds and handed it to me. On the screen was the New York Post website. The headline said, "Zoo sex pervert bridge terrorist linked to Al-Qaeda cell." There were the usual pictures of me and Horkman, but now there were 4 new pictures. Crappy black and white headshots taken from video. 3 were of the assholes from the bar who kidnapped me, with raghead names under their pictures. The 4th was Fook. At least I figured it was. The actual photo showed the head of Chuck E. Cheese, underneath which it said "Mystery Cell Leader." I read the first few paragraphs of the story. The cops had checked surveillance videos from Central Park the night Horkman and I had been at the zoo. They'd identified the 3 assholes, who it turned out were serious Al-Qaeda wanted by the FBI. So now the story, according to quote-unquote federal sources, was that Horkman and I were working with Al-Qaeda, taking orders from the highest levels, and we were planning major new terror attacks. There was a nationwide manhunt on for us. The president had declared a state of emergency. The public was completely freaking out. And Fox News was spearheading a boycott of Chuck E. Cheese. "Jesus," I said. "Yes," said Charisse. She rested her hand on my thigh. "You're a popular man, Jeffrey." "Listen," I said, "this is a huge mistake. I have nothing to do with Al-Qaeda." "Then why'd you go to the zoo with them?" said Mike. I did, but they forced me." "I see," said Mike. "And did they force you to bomb the GW bridge and shoot down the police chopper?" "No." "So you did that on your own?" "No, I didn't do any of that." "I see. And after not doing any of that, you suddenly decided to take a nude cruise, get out of town for a while." "With your friend Philip Horkman," said Therese, "traveling under the names Sue and Arnie Cogan." "I'm curious," said Mike. "Which one of you is Arnie and which one is Sue?" I took a swig of beer, put the bottle back down. "Okay," I said, "I know it looks bad." "Yes, it does," said Mike. "Very bad," said Charisse, who, by the way, still had her hand on my thigh. "But," I said, "I swear to you, I can explain if you'll just give me a minute, okay? A couple of days ago, I was at my daughter's soccer game, and I don't know if you're familiar with the offside rule, but I stopped there because of how they were looking at me. You're not gonna buy this, are you? I said. No, said Mike. I'm blonde, said Charisse, but I'm not stupid. So I said, are you going to turn me in? No, said Mike. You're not. Jeffrey, said Charisse, breathing right in my ear, whatever happened, it's not your fault. Then it hit me where I knew them from. You're the lawyers, I said. In that ad on cable, somebody and somebody. Fricker and Fricker, said Mike. Whatever happened, it's not your fault. That's more than just a motto for us, Jeffrey. That's how we live our lives. We help people who need help, said Charisse, even if they don't know it. And you, my friend, need help, said Mike. Okay, I said, but why would you help me? What's in it for you? Mike leaned in. Let's say we're able to help you out, he said. Maybe you know some people who would appreciate that. Maybe these are people with resources. And maybe they'll be inclined to feel a certain degree of gratitude toward the law firm of Fricker and Fricker. What people? Who are you talking about? You know, said Charisse. Important people you might happen to know with resources. I stared at her. You mean terrorists? I said. A big smile from Charisse and another squeeze. Such an ugly word, terrorists, said Mike. Why can't we stop the name-calling and the labeling? Why can't we just get along? Listen to me, I said. I don't know those people. Mike smiled. Of course you don't, he said. As your lawyers, we wouldn't want to hear you say anything else. Wait, you're my lawyers? I would hope so, for your sake, said Mike. Because if we weren't your lawyers, this wouldn't be a privileged conversation, and if that were the case, we'd have no choice as citizens but to turn you in. We'd hate to do that, said Charisse. I stared at them. They were smiling at me, big smiles, like moray eels, but without the warmth. You know what, said Mike, it's getting windy out here, and we have a lot to talk about. Let's go find your friend Philip. He stood. Charisse pulled me to my feet. It really was getting windy. The ocean looked rough and the deck was moving. I stumbled a little and Mike and Charisse grabbed me, holding me up between them. My legal team. Chapter 23, Philip. With the possible exception of the semi-erection that involuntarily sprouted when I thought I saw Anne Sawyer in an airport, I had never cheated on my wife Daisy. We'd exchanged sacred vows some 18 years earlier, and I was proud that even my fantasy life, at its wildest, was of the PG-13 nature. That's to say that my most lurid wanderings permitted a woman to peel or be peeled down to her underwear. Hey, I'm a guy. But the moment any move was made to undo the hooks on her bra, I was quick to pull the plug in the proceedings by smacking the back of my head and switching to another daydream. Yes, that's how faithful I've been and plan to remain. So it stood to reason that if I were to step out on Daisy, the perfect situation would be to do so with someone who is celibate. Maria, the 12th of 17 children born to extremely Catholic parents, had wanted to enter the clergy since grade school, but now at the age of 34 was questioning whether she still had the same passion and was taking time off to reassess. So you're sort of like the Maria in The Sound of Music, I said. It was about a half hour later, and we were now walking on the ship's outer deck again. Because the winds were blowing a little stronger and the temperature was a little lower, we both taken the time to exercise the optional part of this clothing optional cruise and got dressed. Me in the only pants and shirt I had with me, she in a pair of jeans and bathing suit top. Remember that movie? I continued. Julie Andrews played a nun who temporarily left the convent because she had the same questions you do and ended up marrying Captain Von Trapp and helping him lead his 7 children over the Alps and into Switzerland because the Nazis were bearing down on them. She thought for a moment and then shook her head. There's a big difference between that Maria and me. Well, how so? She looked at me and smiled. I'm a better yodeler. And then I smiled. Oh, is that a fact? And then she started singing. And then she started yodeling. And then I started laughing as she continued. I was falling for her in the purest of ways. We were both clothed. And the earlier stirrings that had made Lieutenant Longfellow stand and salute were now at ease. Still, I was more enchanted than ever. "Can Daisy yodel?" she asked. "Who's Daisy?" She laughed again because she thought I was joking. What she didn't know was that at that particular moment, I literally had no idea who she was talking about. I looked at her. She looked back. We held those gazes, and I wondered if I was going to kiss her. As if I was a spectator to this couple standing alone on this ship's outer deck with no control of my own actions. I seriously wondered if I was going to surrender to the magnetic pull I was feeling, lean in and kiss this beautiful nun. So it didn't surprise me when I allowed my face to drift toward hers, or when I closed my eyes, or when my lips lightly touched her lips. What did surprise me, however, was the sound of a voice, the last voice I'd ever want to hear at this tender moment. "Hey, Horkman, we gotta talk." As I suddenly jerked into another reality, I turned to see that idiot Peckerman, naked except for a hat and sunglasses, flanked by a man and woman whom I'd immediately recognized as the ambulance-chasing couple from those tacky television commercials coming toward us. "Who's that?" Maria whispered. "Don't worry, I'll get rid of him," I whispered back. Because I had no desire whatsoever to expose Maria to the hideous behavior of this lummox and his new friends, I walked away so I could put as much distance between her and this unsightly trio as possible. "What's up?" I asked. "Philip Horkman, say hello to our attorneys, Fricker and Fricker." "This is Fricker," he said, pointing to the woman. "And this is Fricker," he said, pointing to the man. "Or is it the other way around?" he asked, and started snickering as if he just said something funny. And the fact that both Frickers started laughing as if this was the first time they'd heard anyone make a joke about their names made me despise them before we even exchanged a syllable. "Our attorneys?" I asked. "We need them," he said, leaning toward me as if they couldn't hear him, even though he somehow forgot to lower his voice. "They know everything." The wind kicked up a little more, rocking the boat. The four of us instinctively shifted the weight on our feet and grabbed the railing to keep our balance. I took a quick peek back at Maria to make sure she was okay. She was. "If you can take your mind off of Pussy for a second," he now said under his breath, "I think we should go inside and talk to them." With all due respect," I said to the Frickers, "if you do know everything, then you know we're innocent and really don't need legal representation." I opted to leave out the rest of that sentence, which would have been "by shysters such as you." "It's because we know everything that makes us perfect to fight for justice on your behalf," said the male Fricker. "And will prevail," said his female counterpart, who had just noticed had her hand on Peckerman's thigh. "That is, if you allow our team to represent your team." They were obviously able to read my hesitance. "Give it some thought, Mr. Horkman." "Okay," I responded, with every hope that this conversation was over, and I could return to Maria. "Hey, we're on an ocean liner in the middle of the ocean," he unfortunately continued, with a smirk that would make a used car salesman look as honest as our nation's 16th president. "So I know you're not running away." "And it's like we told your partner here," said Mrs. Fricker, tapping her index finger on Peckerman's stunted thigh for emphasis. "These conversations are privileged, so there should be no fears about any of this coming back to haunt you." "I appreciate, but what we can't control," interrupted her husband, "is if someone on board this ship should make an anonymous call to the proper authorities, who will be there to greet you when we dock tomorrow." A threat? Absolutely. There's no other way to take it. I looked over at Peckerman, who was silently urging me to take these Frickers seriously, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. And I was gonna tell them this had I the time, but I didn't have the time because just then a particularly large wave caused the boat to rock, as if it were a huge seaborne cradle, with the side we were standing on dipping into the Caribbean before rocking back to where we were high off its surface, and then slamming back down again with a thud which sent Maria over the railing and into the water. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. 1 second she was there, the next she lost her balance, and her attempt to grab the railing failed. In an instant, the ship righted itself, and I looked overboard and caught a glimpse of her when she surfaced. "Maria!" I yelled at the top of my lungs, but had no idea whether she yelled back or even heard me over the sound of the mounting wind. All I then saw was her getting smaller as she receded into the distance. "Let's get back inside," shouted Peckerman. "Yes, let's discuss our legal strategy," shouted Fricker. "Yes, there's so much we have to do," shouted Fricker. And then I jumped into the Caribbean so I could save Maria. Chapter 24, Jeffrey. Even for Horkman, that had to be some kind of record for assholery. We're in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of a storm, and he jumps off the fucking ship? Dipshit. I looked over the railing, but it was dark down there, and I didn't see anything except waves. I yelled, "Horkman!" But looking back on it, that was pretty useless. Meanwhile, Charisse was screaming like she had fire ants in her woo-woo. To be honest, the only person who did anything practical was Mike, who ran to a life preserver, grabbed it, ran back to the rail, and gave it a mighty heave. It would have been impressive, except at the exact moment he heaved, the ship lurched again, and Mike went over the side after the life preserver. The last thing I heard him say was, quote, "Fuck." Ashuri stopped screaming, ran to the rail, looked over, then looked back at me. "Oh my God," she said, "Mike fell overboard." "I know," I said. She was pointing at the deck. "Look at that," she said. "Do you know what that is?" Deck," I said. "Moisture," she said. I looked. "Well, yeah," I said. "I mean, we're in a storm, so it's negligence," she said. "This deck is extremely slippery." I have to admit I felt a stab of admiration for this woman who had just seen her husband fall off of a ship, probably to his death, and yet somehow had the presence of mind to start planning the lawsuit, possibly before he hit the water. I looked over the side again, keeping a good grip on the railing. "We should find a crew person," I said. "Good idea," she said. "Start documenting our case." That wasn't what I meant, but I let it go. "Maybe we should put on some clothes first," I said. I was cold, and somehow it didn't seem right to go report 3 deaths with my schlong waving around. "Right," agreed Charisse. "We want to look businesslike. My cabin's right near here. You can wear some of Mike's clothes." Apparently she was completely done with grieving over Mike. We went to her cabin. She found me a pair of shorts, a shirt, and some sandals. It was a little too big, and the shirt had that giant Ralph Lauren horse on it that basically says when you wear it, "Hi, I'm a douchebag." But it was okay for an emergency. I kept the hat and shades on to maintain my disguise. While Charisse was dressing, I found the remote control and turned on the TV to check out CNN. The 2 big headline stories were New York terror attack and sudden hurricane grows in Atlantic. So basically there were 2 big shitstorms in the news, and I was in the middle of both of them. "Come on," said Charisse, all dressed now. She grabbed my hand and pulled me out the door and down the corridor. I realized I still had the TV remote in my hand, so I stuck it in my pocket. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked. "We're going to see the captain," she said. Not to piss on your parade, but maybe you noticed we're in a hurricane here." So the captain might be a little busy to be talking to passengers." Charisse looked at me like I was a retard and said, "We'll see about that." And we did. Never again will I underestimate the persuasive power of a woman with legal training and big tits. She went through the ship's chain of command like a chainsaw through a fruitcake. 15 minutes later, we were escorted onto the bridge to meet with the captain. His name was Sven Lutefisk, and he was one of those tall, blue-eyed Norwegian-looking dudes who probably shits icicles. He and several other officers were standing in front of a console with a dozen screens showing radar, GPS, and other nautical things. He did not look happy to see us, but he was polite. "My first officer tells me you have an urgent situation you must discuss with me and only me, Mrs. Fricker," said Charisse. "Charisse Fricker, you may have seen my TV ad." She stuck out her boobs. I cannot say that I have, said Captain Lutefisk. He looked at me and, is this Mr. Fricker? No, said Charisse and I together. Lutefisk studied me for a second, frowning, then looked back at Charisse. As you can see, he said, gesturing at the nautical screens, we are quite busy at the moment with the weather, so perhaps you can tell me what this urgent matter is. I'll get right to the point, said Charisse. You have a problem. What kind of problem? A serious problem with your ship. What are you talking about? People have been hurt, said Charisse, and more people could get hurt. Lutefisk looked at me again, longer this time, then back at Charisse. Are you threatening me, he said. It's not a threat if you can back it up, said Charisse, and I am fully prepared to back it up. She was going to keep talking, but just then one of the officers who'd been staring at me stepped forward and whispered something to Lutefisk. Now, both of them were staring at me. Lutefisk said something Norwegian, and the officer walked briskly to a cabinet against a wall. The other officers formed a circle around Charisse and me. What's going on? I said, even though I was pretty sure I knew, especially when the guy came back from the cabinet holding a handgun. What's going on, said Lutefisk, is that we are going to take you into custody, Mr. Jeffrey Peckerman, and you as well, Mrs. Fricker, or whatever your real name is. You're making a big mistake, said Charisse. Do you have any idea what I can do to you? Is that another threat? Said Lutefisk. You bet your ass it's a threat, said Charisse. You're gonna lose your whole fucking ship, sailor boy. Lutefisk's eyes narrowed. He said something to the officers, and they took a step closer. Lutefisk pointed to me. Empty your pockets, he said. I reached into the right front pocket of Mike Fricker's shorts. My hand closed around the TV remote control. Slowly, said Lutefisk. Slowly, I pulled my hand out of the pocket. The sailors froze, staring at my hand. The only part of the remote showing was about an inch of the black casing and the red power button. Lutefisk said something to the officers, and they took a step back. Their eyes, all for the record blue, were locked on the remote. Is that what I think it is? Said Lutefisk. Well, what the fuck else would it be? I said. I was wondering what kind of cheap-ass cruise line would make such a big deal about taking a TV remote. You can get those things for $10 at Best Buy. Lutefisk was staring at me. Where is it? He said. Where's what? The bomb? He said. My mouth fell open. I was about to show him that it was a TV remote, but Charisse put her hand on my arm. You think we're just going to tell you? She said. Lutefisk shifted his attention to her. Mrs. Fricker, she said. Mrs. Fricker, there are over 2,000 innocent people on this ship. Right, said Charisse, and they're all going to be fine, as long as you do exactly as I say. First, I want that gun. Lutefisk hesitated and then said something Norwegian. Reluctantly, the officer handed the gun to Charisse. She took it, then smiled her moire smile. Now, she said, let's talk money. Chapter 25, Philip. The first thought I had after I jumped off that ship was, I can't believe I jumped off that ship. The next thought I had upon hitting the water was, I wonder if I'll survive the jump off that ship, or will the impact turn me into a floating Rorschach blot? And the third thought I had upon surfacing intact was, now what? I immediately focused on swimming toward where I thought Maria was. I'm a very strong swimmer, in a pool, or a lake, but until that very moment, I never had the occasion to test that prowess in a choppy sea during a raging storm on a moonless night. Truth be told, it was never even on my to-do list. But I'm sure you know that adage about necessity being the mother of invention. Well, as I was feverishly trying to work my way across the Caribbean, it occurred to me that now would be an excellent time for someone to invent a car that rode on top of the water, so it could stop, give me a lift to wherever Maria was, and then drive the two of us to the nearest place where a person could actually stand without drowning. Presuming the possibility of that happening was, at best, a long shot, I continued onward, not even sure at this point that I was heading in the right direction. So I stopped and looked back at the SS Windsong, whose lights were still on. I tried my best to gauge where Maria was standing when she went overboard, then turned around and resumed swimming into the darkness. Exactly 2 strokes. I swam exactly 2 strokes before becoming entangled in something that felt like a body, a human body whose arms were flailing about in a losing battle to stay afloat. Was it possible? Dear Lord, I have no idea how I reached her so quickly, but then again, the Lord works in mysterious ways, does he not? And it stood to reason, given that she was a nun, that the Lord would mysteriously work overtime on her behalf. Maria, I shouted, hold on to me, honey, I'll save you. I'd always wanted to say the words, I'll save you, to a woman. Even as a kid, the fantasy of saving the damsel in distress, whether it be Sir Lancelot swooping down from a white horse and saving Guinevere from a flame-breathing dragon, or the Man of Steel himself swooping down from the sky to untie a bound and gagged Lois Lane from the rails seconds before she's crushed by an oncoming train. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to swoop, and now is my chance. I'm swooping, Maria, I'm swooping. And swoop I did, as I dove under the water, grabbed her around the waist, and employing a Red Cross method I once saw a lifeguard use on my son Trace after he fell into the deep end of our country club's pool when he tripped while practicing demi-plies on the high diving board. I scissor-kicked the 2 of us upward until we broke surface. Her back to me, I reached around and positioned my right arm across her chest and started treading water. The question now was, where were we going? Obviously, the shorter distance was the ocean liner, which was about 100 yards behind us, still aglow. I could swim toward its lights and then yell for help. Surely someone would hear me. Although it did cross my mind that it was potentially risky for me, that by drawing attention to myself, I increased the chances of being recognized. Should any of the passengers or crew have been online since we left New York and had seen mine and Peckerman's pictures on CNN.com or any other news source, which was now a very distinct probability. Still, it was a visible nearby destination that was safest for Maria, and wasn't that an integral part of the swooping procedure, to put the needs of the swoopee before that of the swooper? Of course it was. Don't worry, we'll be back at the ship in no time at all, I said, as I started my one-arm swim back toward the SS Windsong. Thank you, she answered in a gurgling voice that sounded nothing like her. Even allowing for fatigue, the prevailing elements, and the trauma of this entire situation, it was deeper than I'd remembered it being, almost masculine. I was now concerned this was due to water in the lungs, similarly to the way my slightly overweight son Trace, after that lifeguard rescued him, had water in his lungs and his voice sounded deeper and almost masculine, in which case it was advisable, if not necessary, to expel the water. So I stopped swimming again, and with her back to me, put my arms around her, placed my hands on top of each other in 2 fists, and pulled them toward me, like in a Heimlich maneuver, and couldn't help but notice when I moved my hands up and down the front of her body to get a better grip. I didn't feel any breasts, but did feel, from what I know from personal experience, a penis. So after I yelled real loud, I spun her around and found myself looking straight into the face of the lawyer Fricker, the male lawyer Fricker. He said, at Fricker and Fricker, we may bend the law, but we don't break it, which I recognize as his firm's motto from those hideous television commercials. A shyster to the very end. Those were his last words as his eyes rolled back into his head. His entire body went limp. and despite the darkness, I was able to tell that his face was turning bluer than the testicles of a pet shop dachshund when denied access to its mate in the cage next to him. Now I was scared, really scared. Whether Fricker died from exposure or from whatever fall he took off that ship, I didn't care. All I knew was I was holding a dead lawyer in the middle of the Caribbean. The SS Windsong was now cruising into the distance, making it no longer a real option as a destination. And unless those fins I saw approaching belonged to a convention of upside-down surfboards, sharks were on their way. So, hoping like hell that aquatic sharks were attracted to legal ones, I let go of the erstwhile Fricker and started swimming as fast as my arms could propel me. With long overhead strokes that reached as far ahead of me as possible, and legs kicking like two rockets on Dexedrine, I moved forward. Fueled by fear-induced adrenaline, I kept going, non-stop. For how long? 1 hour? 2 hours? Hard to say. All I knew was that I was determined to keep going as long as I humanly could. God knows how much later I noticed that once the sea became less choppy and calmer waters were under me, the current was running in the direction I was going. Did that mean I was getting closer to land? That these ripples would eventually build into waves that would crash onto some beach? I had no idea. So I kept my arms churning as I took nothing for granted. And when I was lifted up by the rising force of water, was that indeed the wave that would carry me ashore? I had no idea. So I kept my arms churning as I took nothing for granted. And when the wave sent me flying through the air and deposited me on what was definitely land, I kept my arms churning as I took nothing for granted. And then after my arms started to really hurt from me just lying there and churning them into the ground, I stopped and lay there exhausted. And then I fell asleep. For how long? All I knew was when I finally awakened, before I even opened my eyes, I was able to tell it was daytime. Still exhausted and aching like I'd never felt before, I lay there with my eyes closed until I heard a voice. Philip? I opened my eyes and saw Maria. Chapter 26, Jeffrey. For a few seconds there, I thought about coming clean to Captain Lutefisk and his crew, showing them that all I had in my hand was a TV remote. What stopped me was Charisse, who was giving me a look that said, "Do not fuck with me." Remember that this woman, A, was not particularly upset to see her husband go over the side, and B, had a gun, so I kept the remote in my pocket. "What do you want?" said Lutefisk. "What we want," said Charisse, "and thank you for asking, is $100 million. "That's absurd," said Lutefisk. "You're absolutely right," said Charisse. "We want $200 million. "We don't carry anything like that amount of money on the ship," said Lutefisk. "Of course not, Sven. That's why you're going to arrange to have it delivered to the ship by helicopter." "This is impossible. We are in a hurricane." Sven, said Charisse. "I'm sure a great, big, strong ship captain like you can handle a little wind." "I'm sorry, but I cannot—" "What are you doing?" "I'm aiming the gun at your face, so you'll pay close attention," said Charisse. "I want you to get on the radio or the satellite or the sonar or whatever the hell you get on, and I want you to tell your company that we want $200 million in unmarked bills, and we want it in 12 hours. And if we don't get it," she gestured with her non-gun hand toward my pocket, "my associate Jeffrey here is going to press the button, and what happens then will make the Titanic look like the SS Minnow." Lutefisk looked puzzled. "What?" said Charisse. "You never heard of Gilligan's Island?" She started singing off tune. She looked at me. "How's it go?" I shrugged. She shifted the gun slightly in my direction. Something, I sang. "A 3-hour tour?" "Right," she said, "a 3-hour tour." She aimed the gun back at Lutefisk and his men. "Everybody," she said. "A 3-hour tour?" they sang hesitantly. "That sucked," said Charisse. She looked at Lutefisk. "Get to work on the money, Sven. The clock is ticking. And have somebody bring me a satellite phone. I need to make some calls." I spent the next 2 hours standing on the bridge with my hand in my pocket while Charisse yacked on the phone a few feet away. I didn't know who she was talking to, and she did not tell me. There was a TV monitor on the bridge tuned to international CNN. Horkman and I were on the screen basically all the time. They had worked our pictures into a logo that said America Under Attack. There was also a picture of the cruise ship with a headline that said Terror at Sea. The passengers had found out they'd been hijacked and were sending texts and emails to relatives back on land. I watched a CNN anchorwoman, frowning so hard she cracked her makeup, interview a man labeled terror expert. She asked him whether he expected the international terror gang, meaning me and Horkman, to strike again. I hate to add to the climate of fear, said the terror expert, but yes, I believe they will strike again, probably soon, and they could strike anywhere. These are not bumbling amateurs. This is a highly organized, well-trained organization led by a pair of very smart, cold-blooded killers who have obviously been planning this operation for a long time while posing as ordinary suburban family men. These people managed to paralyze New York City and somehow escape from one of the most intense manhunts in NYPD history. Now, despite heightened security, they've taken over a cruise ship, which means they have more than 2,000 hostages. God help those poor innocent people if that bomb is detonated. One question about that, said the frowning anchorwoman. Why can't the ship's crew find the bomb and just toss it overboard? I'm sure they would if they could, answered the terror expert, but a cruise ship is a huge, complex vessel. And remember that this man Peckerman is a highly trained forensic plumber. He would have detailed knowledge of the ship's plumbing infrastructure, and he could have hidden the device anywhere. Diabolical, said the anchor, frowning even deeper to show she meant it. Thank you, Dr. Smeltwater, for those insights. Meanwhile, the entire nation remains on edge, wondering where the terror gang will strike next. Nowhere is the mood more tense than in New York City, which is still reeling from the recent wave of attacks. City wildlife authorities were finally able to recapture Hansel and Gretel, the two bears let loose from the Central Park Zoo by the terrorists during what experts believe was some kind of sexually deviant celebration ritual. In a highly dramatic scene this morning, the bears were felled by tranquilizer darts when they burst from a cluster of trees in Central Park and attempted to attack Donald Trump, who is doing a remote appearance on Good Morning America in the park to discuss the terror attacks and promote his upcoming special all-transgender edition of The Apprentice. The bears are now safely back at the zoo, along with a third animal, a rare endangered lemur, which was also inexplicably in the area. Buddy, I said to the screen. What? Said Charisse, who had just finished a call. Nothing, I said. Listen, how far are you planning to take this? What do you mean? I mean, you don't really think they're going to give us $200 million, do you? Absolutely. Okay, say they do. How do we get away? Every cop in the United States will be looking for us. They were already looking for you and you got away, right? You and your terrorist friend. I told you we're not terrorists. I'm a fucking plumber. Charisse looked at the TV, still showing me and Horkman, international terrorist kingpins. Right, she said, you're a plumber, and I'm Hillary Clinton. I'm serious. Fine, stick to that story. I don't give a shit. The point is, the money's coming. Great, so we'll be rich until the ship gets to port, then we'll be in jail. No, we won't. We'll be welcomed with open arms. What the fuck are you talking about? I'm talking about where we're going, she said, holding up the phone. It's all arranged. They're very excited to meet you. Who is? Where the hell are we going? Charisse only smiled. Chapter 27, Philip. I was standing now. My legs were incredibly wobbly, but I'd somehow staggered to my feet, and Maria and I were looking at each other but not saying a word for about a minute. Overwhelmed by the fact, by the impossible odds, by the miracle that must have occurred to have the both of us survive a night in the raging waters of the Caribbean and then deliver us onto this beach. How is it that you're here? She asked. I'd forgotten how beautiful she was, especially when compared to the faux Maria I had tried to save from drowning. The Maria with the hairy back, the breastless chest, and the penis-toting crotch. I jumped off the ship to try to save you. She smiled, then we hugged. Then I collapsed to the ground because my wobbly legs gave out on me. You okay? She asked, laughing. By any chance, would you happen to have a long string on you? String? To tie around me and a big stake in the ground so I won't topple over, like you do when you're growing tomato plants? Laughing again, she extended her hand and helped me back onto my feet. Still holding hands, we started walking. Any idea where we are? I asked. None whatsoever, she said. There are a lot of islands in the Caribbean that you never hear about. Some are privately owned, and some of them are uninhabited. Uninhabited appealed to me, for the time being anyway, as it would offer a much-needed respite from the uneasiness you feel when inhabited places are filled with people who think you're a hunted terrorist. Besides, how often does the fantasy of being stranded on a deserted island with a beautiful woman actually materialize in real life? A beautiful woman that if you ended up sleeping with her, it wouldn't affect your marriage, as your wife would just roll her eyes when you told her, hey, guess what? I had sex with a nun on a deserted island, and then change the subject to her mother's new titanium hip. Unfortunately, that break from other humans was short-lived, because as we walked a little farther, hearing no sounds other than the ones the sea was making, and the words of our own sparse conversation, we suddenly heard voices. Faint at first, but with each step we took toward a small bluff that rose beyond the water's edge, they got louder. A small group of people in what sounded like a chorus of plaintive murmurings, responsive incantations as if in prayer, with one voice in particular wailing above those of the others. I looked at Maria, who seemed to have a better sense of the urgency we were overhearing. She said nothing, but started walking faster, up the slight incline and through some brush before coming upon 5 women on their knees, rocking back and forth with their focus alternating between the heavens and a young boy lying on the ground in front of them. From the looks of him, I gathered that he was about 14 years old. I also gathered that something was terribly wrong, as he was hardly breathing. His eyes were dilated, his skin had large black blotches on it, and there was foam frothing at his mouth. I also immediately recognized that these women were speaking Spanish, which was fortunate, as I'd taken Spanish to my sophomore, junior, and senior years in high school, so communication would not be a problem. When they saw Maria and me emerge from the forest, they fell silent. Lo siento, pero la biblioteca está a la izquierda, I said to them. Maria looked at me and smiled. Philip, may I ask what you're doing? Trying to instill some confidence in these women, who are obviously upset about that young boy, I whispered. By telling them you're sorry that the library is on the left? Right there was still another reason I was so attracted to Maria. She had just called me an idiot without using the word idiot. That had never happened before. Do you speak Spanish? I asked. Yes, she answered fluently. Hablamos inglés, said one of the wailing women. But I don't think I'm going to have to speak Spanish, said Maria. Why? I asked. Because that woman just said that they speak English. She said in Spanish that they speak English? Yes, said Maria. Why would she do that? I asked. Why wouldn't she say in English that they speak English? Maybe because she didn't know that we speak English. Then how did she know to even tell us that they spoke English? Maybe she just assumed we did after she heard how you spoke Spanish. Again, I was an idiot without being called one. I think I would have kissed her right there. Right then, had our attention not been drawn back to the women, who resumed their wailing over the fallen boy, who is now making the same sounds an old car makes when it has post-ignition syndrome. What happened? Maria asked the woman who was wailing louder than the others. She told Maria that her son had been bitten by a spider and that their village's doctor was on his way with medicine. She also told her that the village was about an hour away. This kid won't last an hour, I told Maria. I've seen this before. Where? She asked. I looked around. Back at the woods we just walked through to get here from the beach. I'll tell you later, I said. Right now, have these women make a fire. I don't care how they do it. Aim the sun's reflection on a mirror toward a piece of paper, or try to create friction between a flint and a rock, or rub two sticks together. How about these? Asked one of the wailing women, showing a book of matches she'd just taken from her pocket. Matches would also work, I said, before telling Maria to have them boil water once they got the fire going. What for? She asked. I'll tell you later, I said, before asking Maria to then put the boiling water in a cup or some vessel from which a person can drink. Let me guess, she said, you'll tell me later. No, I'll tell you now. I want to make tea, I said, and then ran back into the forest and found an old oak tree whose protruding bark made it easy for me to remove small sections of it with my hands. I grabbed a few pieces, placed them on a flat stone that was embedded in the ground, found a rock with a sharp edge, and started pounding the white oak bark until it was crushed into tiny pieces. Not a fine powder, which would have been preferable, but still small enough that when I sprinted back to the wailing women and mixed it with the hot water, I was confident it would be effective when I lifted the young boy's head and carefully had him sip the brew. The active ingredients of oak bark, especially tannin, make it an herbal cure for a lot of medical conditions, including the effects of insect bites, I told Maria. I'm just hoping it's not too late for it to handle that spider's toxins. Maria was looking at me with a combination of awe and disbelief. What other ailments does it cure? Internal bleeding, bladder infections, hemorrhoids? Big mistake. Because upon hearing the word hemorrhoids, all 5 of the wailing women raised their hands and asked that I make tea for them as well. You said you've seen this before, said Maria. May I ask where? In my pet shop. I once ordered 2 tropical parrots, and a brown recluse spider had somehow gotten into the crate, and that's when I learned about Deng shock syndrome, which is what I believe this young man has. Were you able to save the parrots? Oh, yeah. The spider didn't bother the birds at all, but he bit my assistant, Hyo, who started looking like this kid until the owner of the GNC in my strip mall came in and gave him some of this stuff until the ambulance arrived. And that's what happened here. After the second cup, the young boy's high fever apparently dropped, and he slowly started to show signs of awareness by the time a Jeep pulled up with 2 men in it. The passenger was obviously the doctor, as he jumped from his seat before it came to a full stop and raced to the boy's side, while the driver was met by the mother of the ailing boy, who spoke to him and then pointed to me. After checking on the boy and getting the doctor's assurance that he was going to be all right, the kid's father approached and hugged me while crying his thanks. I introduced him to Maria, and he invited the 2 of us to his home for dinner as a way of showing his appreciation. We accepted. By the way, where are we? Asked Maria. He smiled and said, Cuba. Chapter 28, Jeffrey. I'll say this. When you hijack a cruise ship, you eat well. Of course you eat well, even if you're a regular passenger. They feed you like 8 times a day, which is why cruise people always look like hairless water buffalo wearing sneakers. But when you take over a ship with a bomb threat, you really go first class. Whatever Sharice and I asked for, it got delivered to us right away. Steak, lobster, shrimp, chocolate mousse, you name it. We washed it down with a couple of bottles of Dom, and then, this was Sharice's idea, we both steered the ship for a while. Lutefisk didn't like that, but fuck him, he didn't have the remote control. Another thing we did to pass the time while we were waiting for the money helicopter was make announcements over the ship's PA system. I'd get on there and say, "Emergency! We're about to tip over. Everybody run to the left side of the ship." And then a little while later, Charisse would get on there and say, "We are now going to have a mandatory penis inspection. We want all the men to line up on the poop deck according to length." And the thing was, those morons actually did it. But the funniest thing we did, this was also Charisse's idea, was to make the officers strip down to their underwear, then march down to the ship's theater and put on costumes. The main show was South Pacific, so we had Lutefisk and his men wear grass skirts and coconut brassieres. They looked like total douchebags. For me, that really lightened the tension of being a wanted international terrorist. While we were at the theater, we saw that the headline entertainer on the ship was Charo, so we told the crew to go get her. She didn't want to be there, and at first she refused to perform for us. But she changed her mind when Charisse fired a warning shot through her guitar. That got her up on stage pretty quick, and she sang a song, which was in Spanish. So I don't know what it was about, except she seemed to be singing it mainly to Charisse, and it had a word that sounded like puta in it a lot. When she finished, Charisse gave her a $5 tip, which I thought was hilarious, but Charo was definitely pissed. She's getting old, and when you look at her up close, her eyes are a little too close together, but I'll give her this. She still has a nice rack. The point being, Charisse and I actually had a pretty good time that night, considering the situation. I was starting to like Charisse as I got to know her as a human being instead of just a lawyer/hijacker. She definitely showed her fun side. I'll be honest, I was starting to think maybe she and I might have a future together, seeing as how Donna would probably never take me back after all this, and Charisse's husband was Shark Chow. We stayed up all night thanks to some pills we got from the ship's doctor. The next morning, just like Charisse predicted, the helicopter came. We went up to the helipad deck with Lutefisk, just the three of us, Charisse making sure the chopper guys could see she had a gun pointed at Lutefisk. She had the whole thing figured out. When the chopper touched down, she told the crew to stay inside and toss the money out. They heaved a couple of duffel bags out. "Open them," Charisse told me. I unzipped the duffels and looked inside. They were both jammed with packets of $100 bills. "Is it all there?" Charisse asked. "How the fuck would I know?" I said. She laughed so hard she banged the gun barrel into Lutefisk's head. "We're definitely developing a rapport." "Good point," she said. "I'll tell you this," I said. "There's definitely a shitload of money." Charisse signaled the chopper to take off. "All right," said Lutefisk, "you got your money. Now you will give me my ship back." "Sven," said Charisse, "you don't give the orders. You're a schmo wearing a coconut bra. We give the orders on this ship." I liked that, the way she said we. "This is unacceptable," said Lutefisk. "We have done everything you asked." "And you're going to keep doing everything we ask," said Charisse, "or Jeffrey and I are going to get into a lifeboat and blow up this crate, and you'll be famous forever as the captain who lost his ship while dressed like a hostess at Trader Vic's." That shut Sven up. I really had to admire Charisse. The woman had balls. She was so convincing I had to remind myself that we didn't actually have a bomb. "All right," said Charisse, "let's get this money downstairs, and Sven here can get this ship pointed toward Havana." "What?" said Sven and I pretty much simultaneously. "We're going to Havana," said Charisse. "We are," I said. "But we cannot go to Havana," said Lutefisk. "The Cuban government is expecting us," said Charisse, giving me a look that said, "No more questions." And so we went to Cuba. It took us 6 hours, with CNN, Fox, and the rest of the news networks covering every second. They were showing aerial shots of our ship, and you could see that there were big U.S. Navy vessels surrounding us, just out of sight over the horizon. Also, there reportedly were submarines in the area, including some from China and Russia. There were all kinds of terrorism experts on TV, and they were going nuts. throwing out theories about what was happening, what our plan was, what the U.S. should do, what would happen next. Everybody agreed that tensions in the Caribbean had not been this high since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Sharice and I had a couple more bottles of Dom. When we got close to Havana, it seemed like the entire Cuban Navy came out to meet us, plus a bunch of fighter jets. We went into the harbor and dropped anchor. A bunch of Cuban Navy boats came alongside, and in a few minutes the ship was swarming with soldiers carrying machine guns. Sharice and I waited on the bridge with our money and the officers. A group of soldiers came in and looked over the situation, and when they decided it was safe, they gave a signal, and a tall officer came in. "I am Major Nunez of the Cuban Revolutionary Armed Forces," he said, speaking English with a very slight Spanish accent. "Who is the captain of this ship?" "I am," said Lutefisk. He stepped forward, and as he did, the left side of his coconut brassiere slipped down, revealing his left nipple. He shoved the coconut back into place. He didn't want to look unprofessional. Lutefisk pointed at Sharice and me. "These people are criminals," he said. "They have placed a bomb aboard this ship. That man has a detonator." Major Nunez looked at me and said, "Is this true?" "Give it to him," said Sharice. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the remote control, and tossed it to him. He caught it, looked at it, and tossed it to Lutefisk. Lutefisk caught it and looked at it for a few seconds. Then he said something I didn't understand, which I'm guessing was Norwegian for motherfucker. Nunez smiled a little. "Mr. Peckerman, I presume?" he said. I nodded. "And this is Mrs. Fricker?" Sharice smiled and made a little curtsy. "Welcome to Cuba," said Nunez. "The commandant is expecting you." Chapter 29, Philip. The man's name was Ramon. His spider-bitten son was Ramon Jr. His wailing wife was Ramona. "I wonder if they ever get confused," I yelled to Maria. We were sitting next to each other in the back seat of the Jeep that was taking us to their home. But even by yelling, we could barely hear each other over the grunting of its engines and the noises the tires made as it sped along the top of a primitive road. "Why would they get confused?" she yelled back. "To them, they are Mom, Dad, and Junior. I don't see a problem." I'd never been in the back seat of a Jeep before, or in the front seat, so I guess you could say this was my first time in a Jeep. "What about mail?" I asked. "What happens when a letter comes to the house and it's addressed to Ramon, but the sender meant for it to go to Ramon Jr.? My arm was around her, and when I pulled her closer so she could hear me, her head stayed on my shoulder. "In that case, when Ramon realizes the mistake, he hands the letter to his son and simply says, 'This is for you.'" She was smiling. "You okay now, Philip?" "I think so." The Jeep pulled off the dirt road and onto a potholed paved one that was just as bumpy. We looked out, and on either side, what we saw could only be described as squalor. Run-down stores, abandoned gas stations with bone-dry pumps, white curtains in the windows of decrepit buildings attempting to make things look homey. And when we turned off that road into Ramon Jr., and Ramona's neighborhood, we entered what was basically a suburban version of the shabbiness we'd just seen. "I hope you like quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso," said Ramona, as we walked on a gravel path from the driveway to the front door. "That's what I make for dinner every Monday." I was hungry, famished in fact. So hungry I could eat a quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso, no matter what that was. The inside of the house was somewhat more cheerful than the outside, thanks to the good intentions of the colorful rugs and threadbare furniture sitting on them, and to the framed pictures of a smiling Ramon, Ramona, and Ramon Jr. in formation on top of end tables, and to Nacho, a frisky mutt that needed approximately 5 more pounds on him to be considered scrawny, and to the Roomba melodies coming through the single speaker on a triangular shelf nailed into the corner where 2 walls met. Yes, it was home sweet home to a happy family protected by the statuettes of a watchful Jesus deployed about the room. and by the arsenal of machine guns that were stacked from floor to ceiling in their kitchen and bathroom. I just flushed the toilet and almost shot my ass off, I whispered to Maria. What's this all about? She whispered in response. Don't let this number of weapons throw you, said Ramon, who'd obviously taken notice of our reactions. There's plenty more in the shed out back. Grenades, too. Oh, good, I heard myself saying. I was worrying there wasn't enough firepower. What the hell are you talking about? Maria whispered to me. I just humor him, I whispered back. He may be dangerous. By the way, I can't remember the last time I whispered this much. We are a happy family, but it is time for us to become happier, said Ramon, as the smell of what I could only assume was quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso came wafting from the huge tray Ramona was carrying into the dining room. Now is the time for my family and all the other families who have been under the heels of this man to live the lives that our fathers died for, Ramona continued. What man are you talking about? Asked Maria. The premier, he answered. In 1959, his own father led the revolution and then became a worse dictator than the one he overthrew. The average Cuban today lives on $20 a month and relies on government ration cards, said Ramona, who was now setting the table. This will soon change, and we'll discuss this all at dinner, said Ramon. He then added, those quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso sure look good, while trying to grab one off of the huge tray. You'll spoil your appetite, said Ramona, slapping her husband's hand away. He really loves my quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso, she told us. If it were up to him, he'd have quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso every meal. Sometimes I think he married me because of my quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso. They both laughed as if this was a joke they always shared. Maria and I felt it right to laugh as well, like idiots. It was about then that I noticed how many place settings Ramona was putting on the table. I wonder if other people are joining us for dinner, I said to Maria. Well, there's you and me. The two of them makes 4, and if Ramon Jr. has recovered enough to join us, it makes 5. Okay, but the table's set for 8, I said. Let us celebrate, said Ramon, who then took a bottle of wine out of a cabinet and took the cork out with a knife he pulled from a sheath attached to his belt. To our son's good health, said Ramona with a nod in our direction. And to the coming revolution, Ramon said, while pouring. Maria and I looked at each other, but said nothing as he handed his wife and the two of us our filled glasses, and as the 4 of us lifted them, he completed his toast. And to the Lord for delivering you to us at this exact time, Senor Horkman. Before I had a chance to react, the front door opened and the other dinner guests arrived. A tall man we would come to know as Nunez, followed by, of all people, Peckerman and Charisse Fricker, who were as shocked to see us as we were to see them. Our liberators are here, proclaimed Ramon, pointing to me and Peckerman. Nunez raised his fist in agreement. They will lead us to our victory, Commandant. Chapter 30, Jeffrey. This was definitely not what Charisse and I had in mind, winding up in some rural Cuban shack in some rural Cuban area with a bunch of rural Cubans. What we had in mind was a whole different scenario, which was this. We would land in Cuba with the 200 mil. We would make a deal with the Cuban government, give them a nice commission for their trouble, let's say 20%, which is $40 million. Then Charisse and I would proceed to live like kings, because $160 million goes a long way in a shithole like Cuba, where the average person makes like 87 cents a month. We could pay them way better, say $5 a month, and they'd be like, wow, let's give them excellent service, nacho gusto. Parentheses, I took some Spanish in high school. Close parentheses. This was actually Charisse's scenario. When she explained it to me on the ship going to Havana, I had a couple of questions. The main one being, was she nuts? Why would the Cuban government go along? I mean, they have an army, right? Why not just point machine guns at us and say, thanks, but we'll take the whole 200 mil? You two can go to prison and survive by eating each other's toenails. That's what I would do if I had machine guns and a couple of bozos showed up with a ship they hijacked with a remote control. But Cherise said that's not going to happen. Why not? Because you're a dangerous international terrorist. But I'm not. I keep telling you that. And I'm starting to believe you. But the United States government says you are, and the Cubans believe you are, so they're going to show you some respect. I still had my doubts, but when we got to Havana, everything seemed to go exactly the way Cherise said it would. Nunez and his men didn't take the money. They let us keep the duffels as they escorted us off the ship to a convoy of military trucks lined up on the dock. We got into the middle one, us in back, Nunez and a driver in front. Then we took off like a motorcade, which I assume was going to the presidential palace. So far, so good. In parentheses, or as the Spanish say, mi casa, su casa, close parentheses. We drove through the city for a while, but we didn't see anything that looked like a palace. After about 45 minutes, it began to dawn on us that we weren't going to the middle of the city. We were heading into the suburbs. The roads were getting shittier and shittier, worse even than the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. Pretty soon we were bouncing along what looked like a yak path. Cherise tapped Nunez on the shoulder. He turned around and said, yes. Where the hell are we going? She said. I assumed you knew, he said. You assumed wrong. Where are we going? He nodded toward me to see his comrade. He said, what? I said, what comrade? Nunez smiled. He had those really, really white teeth that some people just naturally have. It pisses me off. Because I use whitening strips that cost so much that the drugstore keeps them locked in cabinets like precious jewels or nicotine gum. I've used enough of those strips to wallpaper my living room, and my teeth are still more or less the color of the margins of the Declaration of Independence. What gets me is I can remember when nobody gave a shit about this. You'd see people on TV, big stars, Johnny Carson, for example, or Barbara Eden. And I'm not saying they had ugly teeth, but their teeth were not exceptional. You didn't notice their teeth is my point. Their teeth were human. But now in the entertainment industry, everybody's teeth are the color of a brand new urinal. There's like a miniature men's room in their mouths. When they smile, they're giving skin cancer to people around them from the reflection. But that's what we're all supposed to look like now. That's why we're paying $40 a box for those stupid strips that probably cost 18 cents to make and sting the hell out of your mouth. And you still have yellow teeth. And then you see some guy like Nunez. He lives on this shithole island where they don't even have drugstores. Probably brushes his teeth with the sea urchin. And he has teeth like Tom fucking Cruise. Which is why I was pissed off when he smiled at me the way he did when I said, what, comrade? Please, said Nunez, you do not have to play this game with me. What game? I said. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Nunez nodded. I understand, he said. You will trust nobody but Ramon himself. Who's Ramon? Said Cherise. Nunez flashed his urinals at her. So the lady is playing the game also. Fine. We will talk when we arrive. Arrive where? I said. But Nunez had turned away. He was done talking. We kept driving and the road kept getting shittier. After a couple of hours, we came to a village, turned down a side road, and stopped in front of a shack. We are here, said Nunez. This is where we're going, said Cherise. An outhouse? Nunez only smiled. We got out of the truck. Cherise and I grabbing the duffel bags. We followed Nunez into the shack. There were some people sitting at a table, including a Cuban guy who I figured was Ramon. He and Nunez said something to each other, but I wasn't paying attention. I was staring, with my mouth open, like a grouper, at another person at the table, the last person I expected to see, here or anywhere else. Horkman. He was with the woman who fell off the ship before he jumped. What the fuck? I said. It's nice to see you too, he said. How the hell did you get here? I said. I swam, he said. He put his arm around Maria. We swam? I couldn't believe it. The asshole fucked up his own death? She stepped forward, looking very tense. What about Mike? She said. Mike? Said Horkman. My husband. Without saying a word, Horkman stood up, came over to Charisse and grabbed her in a big hug. Then he held her at arm's length, gave her a big, sad, moony-faced look, and said, I'm afraid he didn't make it. Charisse relaxed. Jesus, she said, you had me worried there. Ignoring Horkman's surprised look, she shoved him away, turned to Nunez, and said, Now that we're here, can you please tell us why we're here? Nunez looked at Ramon, who smiled. He also had really nice teeth, the prick. I assume you know already, he said, and you are simply testing me to see how much we know. Fine, I will go along with this. I am the commandant of the People's Army of the People, which has been preparing to strike down the regime of the corrupt pig who has sucked the blood out of this nation. Wait, said Charisse, turning to Nunez. Don't you work for the corrupt blood-sucking pig? He believes I do, said Nunez. The old fool trusts me. In fact, he personally ordered me to meet your ship, but by then Ramon had told me the real reason you were coming here. Which is what? I said. Please, said Ramon, we are not fools. First, your comrade swims ashore undetected by the authorities, and within hours is able to make contact with me, even though my location is a closely guarded secret. Horkman did that, I said, looking at Horkman, who was looking puzzled. He is a highly skilled commando, said Ramon. He owns a pet store, I said, called The Wine Shop. Yes, of course, he has a cover story, but he is an extraordinary soldier. He's a putz, I said. That is a military rank, I assume, said Ramon. I am unfamiliar with it. But to continue. Only hours after Senor Horkman swims ashore, you, his comrade, the famous Jeffrey Peckerman, arrived by the brilliant maneuver of hijacking a cruise ship, bringing with you enough American dollars to finance our cause. What? Said Teresa and me, pretty much at the same time. For years, said Ramon, we have been secretly sending out requests for help, hoping that somewhere in the world we would find allies willing to fight with us. We had almost given up hope, but now you are here, Horkman and Peckerman, famous revolutionary fighters as seen on CNN. With your leadership, and with this great financial gift you have brought us, we can finally begin our fight. Ramon was pounding the table now, shouting, We have waited long enough. We will not wait a moment longer. The revolution begins now. But first we will enjoy Ramona's delicious quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso. He shouted something in Spanish, and some soldiers came in and took away our duffel bags. Next thing we knew, we were sitting at the table, me across from Horkman, being served heaping plates of some Cuban glop that looked like they scraped it off the bottom of an aquarium, while Ramon and Nunez toasted us. Outside, people were singing and firing guns into the air, getting ready for the revolution, which was going to start right after dinner, and which this asshole and I were supposed to lead. Chapter 31, Philip. I think we should wait till morning. We were sitting in the dining room eating what I could only assume was dessert for no reason other than it was an orange salad served alongside a cup of brown liquid that I could only assume was coffee. I hardly touched my dinner as I wasn't a fan of Latin cuisine. I'd eaten it for the first time about 3 years earlier when a restaurant called La Casa del Sol opened in the same strip mall as the wine shop. So, as a gesture of strip mall solidarity, I gave the place a few tries, until it became evident that if I were going to continue eating there, I'd have to surgically line my large intestine with copper tubing to withstand the corrosive torrents careening through it after every meal. What should wait till morning? Asked Ramon, looking up with a mouthful of the orange salad. The revolution, I told him. But why? Asked Nunez, also with a mouthful of the orange salad in his mouth. Seated next to each other, with their mouths alternately opening and closing, they look like warning lights at an intersection. Because it's been our experience that governments are more apt to fall in the daytime, I said, with every hope that the omnivore to my left, aka Peckerman, would take maybe 10 seconds away from making sure there wasn't a morsel left on anyone's plate to hold up his end of the word hour and chime in. No such luck, so I ventured onward. It adds to the element of surprise, I explained. But isn't it more surprising to attack at night when everyone's sleeping? Asked Ramona. That's done so often these days that there's really no surprise. It's almost expected at this point, I told her. But in the late morning, say 11, maybe 11:30, when the regime you wish to overthrow is inside the very buildings you're looking to take over, it's so much more effective. At night, you're just attacking empty offices, said Maria. Exactly, I said. It felt good to hear a voice that wasn't my own, especially Maria's. And from the nods now coming from the other side of the table, it looked like my stalling tactic, as feeble as it was, had a logic that Ramon and Nunez were willing to consider. We will follow your lead, Nunez said. We will go outside and tell the rebels to get a good night's sleep, said Ramon as they left the table and walked toward the front door. Dealing with Peckerman was another story. While Maria and that silicone-infused bimbette he was traipsing around with helped Ramona clear the table, I was off in a corner trying to knock some sense into him. I'm just trying to buy us some time so we can figure out how we can get out of this mess, Peckerman. Don't you get it? They think we know what we're doing, that we actually want to do what they think we're doing. I know that, but it's you who doesn't get it, Horkman. I want them to think that you've got the brains and that I'm the dumb one, like those guys Lenny and Squiggy in Of Mice and Men. You mean Lenny and George? Lenny and George? In the millisecond between the time I heard him say that and when my lips got in position to respond, I was somehow able to mentally scroll down the list of the biggest imbeciles I've ever met and saw Peckerman's name sprout wings and fly to the top. Peckerman? Lenny and Squiggy were the goofy sitcom characters who lived upstairs from Laverne and Shirley. Lenny and George were the migrant farm workers in the novel Of Mice and Men by the Pulitzer Prize-winning author John Steinbeck. I pray you can appreciate the difference. Maria and Charisse came back to the dining room table and grabbed some more plates. Apparently, Peckerman caught my gaze that followed Maria back to the kitchen. Fuck her yet? Excuse me? The nun. A word to the wise, Horkman. Nuns consider themselves married to God, so I'd watch my step if I were you, he said, pointing skyward. That is one jealous husband you don't want to piss off. He's God, for God's sake. Fucking guy can turn your dick into a fried wonton just like that, he said while snapping his stubby little fingers. Do you have to talk that way, Peckerman? What way? Your choice of words, effing this, effing that, especially when you're talking about nuns and God. I never said effing, Horkman, I said fucking. I know what you said. So if you're going to quote me, I'd like for you to quote me accurately. Fine. Fine? Yeah, fine. Then say it, Horkman, say fucking. No. No? You just said fine. Cut it out, Peckerman. Come on, Horkman. You're an adult male who has a mortgage and a pet shop, so there's no reason whatsoever for you to say effing like you're some choir boy who's going to get cornholed by a priest who thinks that if you say fuck, it's a request. Now say it, damn you. Say fuck. And then, without warning, he lunged and wrestled me to the floor like I was a rodeo steer and proceeded to pummel me while yelling, Say it, you weasel! Until Ramon, now with a rifle slung over his shoulder, came back into the house also yelling, Say it! Huh? Peckerman and I said in unison as Ramon pulled him off me and helped us both to our feet. You heard me, shouted Ramon. Go out there and say to them what you said to us, that we should wait till morning before we go to the capital city, because they're ready now. But maybe they'll listen to you because of who you are. He then motioned us out the front door, where we suddenly found ourselves staring into the face of a mob of maybe 100 excited rebels, who were raising rifles and torches, and upon seeing us, much to my horror, began cheering, Vive el Horkman and Vive el Peckerman. Well, I guess they think you're a more important terrorist because they said your name first, whispered Peckerman with a tone that simply reeked of jealousy. Either that, or they're chanting in alphabetical order. Yeah, that must be it, I said with just enough sarcasm to make him even more jealous. For the most part, they speak Spanish, Nunez told us, so let them hear your voices and I will tell them what you've said. Okay, I heard myself saying, and then felt the two of them staring at me and Peckerman as we each fell silent with the hopes that the other would speak first. You first, Peckerman finally said. Why me? I asked. Because they're not chanting in alphabetical order, he said, like the whiny turd that he was. I then looked out at the mob, extended my arms, and patted the air downward as a signal for them to be quiet. They did. Big shot, I heard Peckerman say under his breath. All people should be free, I shouted, before Nunez shouted its Spanish translation to the crowd, who became vocal again upon hearing it. They should be free because they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I proclaimed with every hope that very few of the people in this raucous mob had recently taken a look at our Declaration of Independence. Apparently they hadn't, as Nunez's translation stirred them even more so. And toward that end, every government should be dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I went on to say with every hope that the mob hadn't recently taken a look at Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. This time Nunez's translation caused them to cheer louder. So give me liberty or give me death, I shouted, with every hope that Cuba's public school system didn't deem it important to spend an inordinate amount of time teaching their barefoot students about Patrick Henry. And this time Nunez's translation managed to bring the crowd's passions to a glorious crescendo, as the very thought of their impending freedom simultaneously ignited a celebration of singing and dancing, combined with the mounting cries of "Quando, Quando," which even I knew meant when, and was the actual reason that Ramon had brought us outside to begin with. Quando, Quando. The crowd's single voice kept growing louder. Well, Ramon asked. Quando, Quando. What shall I tell them? Nunez wanted to know. Quando, Quando. So I guess now would be a good time to tell you that what happened next still stuns me to this very day. For at the exact moment I was about to answer the mob's rallying cry of Quando by shouting Mañana, that idiot Peckerman, who'd remained mercifully quiet thus far, pointed to a group of rebels who were celebrating by holding hands while dancing in a circle, and shouted at the top of his hideous lungs, Ahora! Which is an Israeli folk dance, though it was only natural that a Spanish-speaking mob who just asked when they would start the revolution heard it as Ahora, which means now, and then let out loud cries of Viva el Horkman and Viva el Peckerman as they turned on their heels and headed toward the capital. Chapter 32, Jeffrey. I'll be honest, I didn't know Cubans could be Jewish, but it turns out that at least some of them are, because while Horkman was giving his asshole speech, they started dancing the hora, and then all of a sudden the whole mob of them was running down the road waving their guns. I thought, okay, good, they're going off to get killed. Time for me to find Charisse and the duffel bags and get the hell out of here. But before I took 2 steps, a truck roared up, and Ramon and Nunez and their men shoved me and Horkman into a middle seat. There were Cubans with guns all around us, so forget about getting away. I looked around for Charisse and spotted her behind us. She was getting into another truck with some Cubans who happened to be carrying, guess what? The duffel bags. I'm yelling, Charisse, hey! But she was talking to the Cubans and didn't hear me, or she pretended she didn't hear me. She was definitely sticking her boobs out. The truck took off and we were bouncing down the road, Horkman squashing into me every 2 seconds like a big sack of duck shit. In front of us, Ramon and Nunez were talking to each other in Spanish. After a few minutes, they turned around and yelled something in Spanish to the guys behind us, who yelled something in Spanish back. Next thing I knew, they were handing me and Horkman guns. I don't know anything about guns. The only time I ever used them was in 5th grade, when Brian Krepmer and I stole his brother's BB gun and I shot the UPS man in the ass, and he pounded on the door and told Mrs. Krepmer he was never going to deliver anything to their house again, which meant she had to quit her Amway business, which was actually a relief to the rest of the neighborhood, but Brian and I were both grounded for 2 weeks anyway. But this thing the Cubans gave me was a whole different level of gun. It was heavy and it had a lot of parts and looked like it was maybe for shooting down airplanes. I looked over at Horkman and whispered, "What do they think we're going to do with these?" "Lead them into battle," he whispered back. "I'm not leading them anywhere," I said. "I wouldn't lead them into a Chick-fil-A. I don't even know how to shoot this fucking thing." Now, at this point, if you have been paying attention, you already know that Horkman is the biggest douchebag in the history of vaginal hygiene. But you can't really comprehend the true magnitude of how big a douchebag he is until I tell you what happened next. What happened was, instead of helping me solve the problem at hand, namely, we're with a bunch of lunatic Cubans trying to get us all killed, and this imbecile moron showed me how to shoot my gun. "I think all you do is take off the safety," he said, leaning over and flipping something. Then it's just a matter of, at that exact moment, the truck hit a pothole the size of Long Island Sound, and Horkman went flying sideways into my lap. I don't know whose finger pulled the trigger. Could have been him. Could have been me. Could have been his dick, for that matter. All I know is while Horkman was on top of me, my gun started shooting, and not just one bullet, a lot of bullets. Then things happened fast. First of all, Horkman screamed like a girl into my ear. I figured this was him getting shot, but it later turned out he wasn't, unfortunately. Next, the truck made a sharp left-hand turn into the jungle. This was because the driver had bailed out, along with Nunez, Ramon, and the other Cubans who were interested in not getting shot. Next, I pushed Horkman off me, and the gun finally stopped shooting, and Horkman fell out of the truck, still screaming. So I was alone, in a driverless truck, smashing through all kinds of trees and branches, and suddenly I burst into a clearing, and, oh God, right ahead I saw a canyon. There was no time for me to bail, and the truck went right over the edge. I could see down into the canyon. There was a shallow river on the bottom, but mostly big rocks. I knew I was going to die. You know how they say that when you're about to die, your whole life flashes before your eyes? Well, they're full of shit, because I was in that exact situation, and all I thought was, this is totally Horkman's fault. That's when Spider-Man showed up. He wasn't the actual Spider-Man, of course. He didn't have the gay spandex costume. He was wearing dark clothes and a dark wool cap, and his face was painted black. But he definitely had Spider-Man's skills. He dove off the side of the canyon, grabbing me in mid-fucking air out of the truck with one hand, and yelled, "Hold on!" Then he yanked something out of his backpack with his other hand. Suddenly there was a parachute wing over us, and we're swooping down to the river. The truck hit first. It landed on some rocks and exploded, just like in the movies. I could feel the heat from the fire when we went over it. We landed in water that was maybe 2 feet deep, both of us going under for a second. The guy yanked me to my feet, shoved me, and yelled, "Move!" I stumbled down the river to a break in the canyon wall. The guy shoved me in there. "Stay here," he said, "and keep quiet." He had a knife strapped to his leg that looked like it could decapitate a mastodon. I kept quiet. A few seconds later, the end of a rope slapped the ground next to me. The spider guy grabbed it and quickly tied it around me in some kind of harness. "Hang on," he said, and the next thing I knew, I was being hauled up the canyon wall. When I got to the top, I saw who was hauling me up. More spider guys. There were 5 of them, including the guy who rescued me, who climbed the rope after they got me up. We were now in some bushes on the far side of the canyon from where the truck went off. Peering through the bushes, I could see a bunch of Cubans on the other side, including Ramon and Nunez, looking down at the burning truck. I could also see Horkman with them. I looked around at the spider guys and said, "Who are you guys?" "Well, ask the questions," answered my rescuer. He definitely had an American accent. Suddenly it hit me who these guys had to be. "Jesus," I said, "are you Navy SEAL Team 6? One of them snorted. "We call Navy SEAL Team 6 the Campfire Girls," he said. "So who are you?" I said. He took a step closer and said, "Did you ever hear of the U.S. Coast Guard Salamander Unit 9? "No," I said. "Good," he said, "because we don't exist." Chapter 33, Philip. By now you know I'm not a negative man, and that I have never used the misfortunes of others as a salve for my own shortcomings. No, I was brought up to believe happiness can best be attained when a person makes an honest self-evaluation, sets realistic goals, then works his butt off to make them come to pass. So, in the end, a man's contentment is his own responsibility, unaffected by the fates of those around him. That said, I would be less than honest if I didn't say that when I saw that driverless truck go over that cliff with Peckerman inside and then burst into flames after crashing to the bottom of that ravine, my gut reaction was a profound regret that a driverless truck with Peckerman inside didn't crash and burst into flames on his way to that AYSO championship soccer game, so I'd never have met him after I called his daughter offside, parentheses, which she was, by the way, parentheses, and become a wanted international criminal enmeshed in a foreign war. So I confess I was not altogether heartbroken as I stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down at the burning truck. Next to me, Ramon and Nunez spoke a few hurried words to each other. With my limited Spanish, I was able to gather that they thought we'd been attacked by enemy snipers. Apparently, they weren't aware that it was Peckerman's gun that had done the shooting. Concerned about being targets, they turned and trotted back into the safety of the trees. Alone now, I lingered a moment longer, looking down at the flaming wreckage, thinking about the horrible fate that had fallen Peckerman. Then I saw something even more horrifying. Peckerman was still alive. Somehow, impossibly, he had escaped the crash and was now standing with some other men on the far side of the ravine. I glanced behind me, no sign of Nunez or Ramon. I climbed down into the ravine and with some effort made my way up the other side, where Peckerman and I had a joyful reunion. If you think I'm being sarcastic, I am, because what he said to me was, "Thanks a lot, asshole." "For what?" I said. "Shooting my gun, dickwad. I'd be a dead man if Spider-Man here hadn't saved me." He pointed at one of the half-dozen tough-looking uniformed men standing nearby, observing us. I was going to point out that it wasn't my finger that had pulled the trigger, but I was more curious about the men. "Who are they?" I asked. "They're salamanders," he said. "They're what?" "Salamanders." No offense, I nodded politely at the tough-looking men, but I'd never heard of them. "That's because they don't exist," said Peckerman. "At least, that's what they told me. Seems to me they have to exist because there they are." "Peckerman, you idiot! It's a figure of speech. They must be such a secret unit that no one knows about them." "But now we do," he said. "And if you tell anyone, we'll have to kill you," said one of the salamanders, apparently the leader. I got the distinct impression that he was dead serious, but Peckerman, imbecile that he is, laughed. A hearty, derisive laugh, with his ridiculous head pitching this way and that, as if he'd somehow left his neck muscles back at Ramon, Ramona, and Ramon Jr.'s house. "You think that's funny?" asked the lead salamander. "Not at all," Peckerman answered. "If you tell anyone, we'll have to kill you," he said, mimicking. "Jesus, you can come up with anything more original than that. You've been watching too many movies." Another derisive laugh or two later, after the laws of physics were kind enough to make his bobbing head eventually slow to a halt, Peckerman swiveled it in my direction. "What crawled up your ass and ate your vocabulary?" he asked. With the salamanders now surrounding us, I chose each of the following words like they were vials of plutonium, as though they had the incendiary power to explode and launch chunks of me and Peckerman skyward before they ultimately rained back down and hung like ornaments from the nearby foliage once they returned from their missions high above the Earth's surface. First of all, Peckerman, they just saved your life, so I'm thinking something that even resembles a thank you may be in order. Secondly, unless I'm misreading the angles of the guns those gentlemen are pointing at us, the phrase, "we'll have to kill you," is not a figure of speech the way "we don't exist" was a figure of speech. I then turned to the salamanders and said, I'm helping him bone up on his figures of speech. Apparently the salamanders couldn't care less what kind of linguistic lesson I was conducting. They stared at me in unified non-acknowledgement for about 10 frightening seconds before retreating deeper into the jungle, where they began having an animated conversation. Peckerman then leaned toward me, cupped his hand to my mouth, and began speaking in hushed tones, which made absolutely no sense to me. I don't want them to overhear us, he explained. But they're 30 yards away, and they're not whispering, and we don't hear them. Point taken, he said, and then lowered his cupped hand but continued to whisper, Look, I've already figured out that they're Americans. Me too. From their accents, right? That and the American flag patches on their sleeves, I said, nodding. Peckerman looked over at the 6 salamanders and apparently for the first time noticed the patches. Fine, he said. So anyway, if they're really a secret operative, it means that our country is helping overthrow the Cuban government the way we do in a lot of countries. I agreed with him. It seemed obvious that was the objective. In recent years, democracy had come to so many other suppressed nations around the world, and it made sense that it was now Cuba's turn. But I was also affected by Peckerman's referring to the United States as our country. Was it still? As far as I was concerned, it was. I'd always been a devoted American who voted every November and watched football every Sunday and had a flag proudly waving on my lawn every national holiday. But now that I was considered to be a threat to the way of life of the country I loved, I was a man without a home. From there, my thoughts took me to my kids, and I wondered if they were worried sick about me, or if they were actually happy about the absence of a reviled father who'd let them down and branded them forever, like Osama bin Laden Jr. would have been branded if Osama bin Laden had a son and named him Osama bin Laden Jr., or if Lee Harvey Oswald had a son and named him Osama bin Laden Jr. As for Daisy, well, part of me wondered if she'd find a new man. We were high school sweethearts, the first and only lovers each of us had, but now? Like all marriages over the course of a long run, ours had a fair amount of peaks and valleys, but I couldn't help feel that this current valley was one we might never emerge from. Then again, did I even want us to? What about Maria? Where was she, I wondered? The last time I saw her was the night before, after the rally outside Ramon's house, after he and Nunez shoved me and Peckerman into that truck, and after Charisse and those duffel bags filled with money, and those breasts filled with enough rubber to erase the Empire State Building, entered the back of that other truck with those Cuban rebels. I saw Maria voluntarily take a seat in a Jeep that was driven by what I could have sworn was a priest, and speed away in the opposite direction. You know, said Peckerman, I wonder if this revolution can help you and me in the long run. How so? I asked. Well, everyone thinks we're enemies of democracy, right? But if we help bring freedom here to Cuba, wouldn't it show the world that we're not terrorists? And that what happened was just one huge misunderstanding? Peckerman had caught me off guard. So much so, all I could do was stare at him in silence for a few seconds. Makes sense? He asked. Yes, it makes a lot of sense, I finally uttered, and it did. What didn't make sense was that this imbecile thought of it. What occurred next happened rather quickly and without further discussion. Our grabbing clumps of mud and streaking them onto our faces, our tearing off a sleeve from our shirts and tying them on as headbands, picking up rifles and raising them aloft, and our running out of the jungle, with Peckerman shouting across the ravine to a stunned Ramon and Nunez, Venga, we have a dictator to kick the shit out of. Chapter 34, Jeffrey. You know those Rambo movies where Sylvester Stallone runs around some dirtbag communist country with no shirt on and shoots down a helicopter with a slingshot and kills 237 communist soldiers with his bare hands? Those movies are unrealistic. Here's what reality is like. Horkman and I are on one side of the ravine, holding our guns over our heads. The Cubans are on the other side, going nuts, shouting, "Yee!" ready to go kick some ass. In a movie, the next scene, we're all charging into battle. But what actually happened was, first, Horkman and I had to climb down our side of the ravine, which was hard because those guns are a lot heavier than they look. Plus, it was really steep. We both kept dropping the guns and falling down, so we ended up mostly sliding on our butts, which took a while. The Cubans tried to keep cheering, but after a while, they realized they better pace themselves. Like, every 20 seconds or so, one of them would go, "Yee!" But you could tell they were losing the mood. Plus, I'm just going to come right out and say this. I had to go to the bathroom. Bad, which is something that never happens in the movies. You never see Rambo going to the bathroom. You never see, what's his name, the guy in those Bourne movies, Matt Damon, when he and his co-star Hot Babe are fleeing some foreign country and he's killing enemy agents with kung fu, speaking 9 languages, hotwiring a car, and driving like a stuntman, etc. You never hear him say to the babe, "Geez, I'm sorry, but even though those enemy agents are like 20 yards behind us, shooting at us, I need to make a pit stop, because if I don't get to a toilet right now, I'm going to turn this car into a septic tank." That's the way I felt when Horkman and I got to the bottom of the ravine. I had a cramp in my gut like I was about to give birth to a walrus. I had no choice but to drop my pants right there and then. "What are you doing?" Horkman said. "What does it look like I'm doing?" I said. "You can't at least go behind something?" he said. "Go behind what, asshole?" I said, because A, there was nothing to go behind, and B, Horkman is an asshole. "I don't believe this," said Horkman. He walked about 10 yards and sat down on a rock, facing away. "Thanks a lot, douche nozzle." So there I was squatting, and I don't want to get too specific here, but it was a severe fire hose situation. I was splattering the gravel big time. Plus, there was a certain amount of gas noise. Plus, you had the natural echo in the ravine. I don't think this is what the Cubans were expecting in the way of military leadership. I could hear them up there talking about me, and then one of them went, "Yee, yee, yee," definitely sarcastically, and then they were all laughing. Assholes. Like they never had diarrhea in a ravine. I fire hosed for what I would say a good 3 minutes, off and on. When I was finally done, I realized I had nothing to wipe with. And of course, Horkman was no help because he's an asshole. I looked up at the Cubans, but I didn't see Ramon or Nunez. Just a bunch of morons who didn't speak English. I yelled, "Tango, toileto, papero?" I don't know the Spanish word for toilet paper. Not that it would have made any difference, because they probably haven't had toilet paper in Cuba since 1964. So, of course, the idiot Cubans didn't know what the hell I was talking about. They pointed at my ass and made a wiping motion, which they thought was very funny. Ha, yee, jerk-offs. But finally they got the point and threw down some kind of big jungle leaves. I wasn't too happy about that, because I remembered a situation at the 1983 Northeastern New Jersey Boy Scout Council Camporee when this kid in my troop, Lenny Vitale, wiped his ass with some leaves that turned out to be poison sumac. And by the time they got him to the hospital, according to his brother Victor, his butt was the size of a truck tire. But I figured I had no choice. I wiped myself as best I could, and then Horkman and I started up the other side of the ravine. It took us even longer than going down did, but we finally made it to the top. Nunez was waiting for us. "I must ask you," he said, "how did you survive the attack? I confess that when I saw the truck explode, I feared the worst." Horkman gave me a nudge. I looked at him and he shook his head, indicating, "Don't say anything about the salamanders." I gave him the finger, indicating, "Fuck you." Then I looked back at Nunez and said, "You ever heard of Born?" "Who?" he said. "Born," I said, "like the born identity, the born extremity, etc." "No," he said. "It's a special kind of agent training," I said. "Born training. We train for this situation." "You train for going off a cliff in a truck?" he said. "Exactly," I said. "Impressive," he said. Yes, I agreed. Ramon came out of the jungle and said, "We must go. We have lost time." We got into a different truck, Ramon and Nunez in the front seat, Horkman and me behind them. The convoy started up and we were bouncing down the road again, if you can call it a road, going maybe 2 miles an hour. Horkman leaned over to me and, keeping his voice low, said, "While you were making the river of poop, I did some thinking." "Good for you," I said. "Listen to me, Peckerman, this is important. Why do you think the salamanders let us go?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're supposed to be wanted terrorists, right? Wanted by the United States?" I nodded. "Well, they're United States military. Why didn't they kill us or capture us? Why'd they save you and give us both of us guns and send us back to the rebels?" "We already discussed this, Horkman. They're secret, operators. They're helping the rebels overthrow the government." "That makes no sense," he said. "What do you mean?" "The salamanders saw us up close. They know we're not military threats. I think they know we're just a couple of schlubs from New Jersey." I had to nod. He's an asshole, but he had a point. The salamanders didn't seem impressed with us. "So," continued Horkman, "why'd they send us back over to lead the rebels?" I shook my head. "I think," said Horkman, "they want to make sure that the rebels lose." "Why?" "I don't know, but it's pretty obvious they're not on the rebels' side. Didn't even let the rebels see them. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if once the battle starts, the salamanders are fighting against us." I thought about that. "So they're going to let us go in there and get killed?" Horkman nodded and said, "I think they might even help kill us." If there's one rule that I always try to live by, it's this: don't get killed. I knew I had to do something. In the seat ahead, Nunez and Ramon had their backs to us. I glanced behind. There were 3 Cubans in the back seat, but they were all dozing. Behind our truck were some more, but they were a ways back, and there were dust clouds on the road. I moved over toward the edge of the seat. "What are you doing?" whispered Horkman. "I'm getting the fuck out of here," I said. "Bad idea," said Horkman. He pointed toward the trees. I looked. There were dark shapes moving in there, keeping pace with the truck. The salamanders. As I watched, one of them came closer to the road so I could see his face. It was the guy who saved me, Spider-Man. He pointed at the road, then shook his finger back and forth, indicating, "Don't get off the truck." Then he reached down and pulled something out of his boot. It was a really big knife. He held it up, indicating, "I have a really big knife." With his other hand, he pointed 2 fingers at his eyes, then one at me, indicating, "I'm watching you." I slid back into the middle of the truck, leaned over, and put my head in my hands, indicating, "Fuck me." Chapter 35. Philip. It was so hard to believe. Even as I sat in the back of that truck with a bandana around my head and a machine gun across my lap, it still hadn't sunk in that I, Philip Horatio Horkman, a pet shop owner who wore corrective shoes well into my junior year of college, was on my way to Havana to help overthrow the Castro regime. I had never been in a war. I'm a member of the in-between generation that made me too young for Vietnam and then too old for any of the Gulf Wars, which my father, a decorated World War II veteran, could be counted on to throw up to me whenever the mood hit him. "Enlist, you coward!" he once shouted, apropos of nothing anyone was talking about at that particular moment. "Dad, Julius, we're in the middle of a Seder," I remember my mother saying after this outburst. "Your only son is reciting the 4 questions at a meal celebrating freedom from bondage, and you're shouting for him to serve in a war effort." Why not? He asked. Because there's no war right now, Mom said. And because I'm only 7 years old right now, I reminded him. But now, so many years later, I was in a war and looked for answers before that first shot was even fired. What do you suggest we do, El Horco? Asked Ramon. The rebels had taken to calling me El Horco, a nickname I was flattered by until I learned its translation meant the vomit. The truck was beginning to slow down, so it was so hard to believe. So it was just a matter of time, moments, until we began the mission of liberating Cuba from the grip of a ruling class whose greed became even more palpable when I saw their homes and neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city. Sprawling ostentation worthy of Beverly Hills zip codes, as compared to the squalor inhabited by Ramon and millions like him. Secure the perimeter, I advised. It was a phrase I'd heard dozens of times in movies, and it seemed to work in those situations where soldiers wanted to contain the enemy, so I figured I'd give it a whirl. Of the entire city? He asked. No reason not to, I answered with the nonchalance of someone who wasn't soiling himself. With all due respect, El Horco, I do not believe that would be effective. As well armed as we are, there are but a few hundred of us, and in a city that covers 280 square miles, unless the enemy decided to run toward each of our soldiers, we'd be too far apart to be able to keep them within that perimeter. I felt stupid, and then Peckerman chimed in. So why don't we just secure the radius? I no longer felt stupid. What are you saying? Asked Ramon. Well, if I remember my high school geometry, explained Peckerman, the radius extends from the edge of the circle to the middle, so if we all lined up that way, at least half the perimeter will be secure, which is better than nothing. But the very concept of guerrilla warfare is for a small group of camouflage rebels to hide, ambush, and then quickly retreat, said Ramon. It's based on the element of surprise, which, standing in the middle of a circle where the enemy can not only see us, but also pick us off one at a time, as if we were ducks in a shooting gallery, completely compromises that strategy, added Nunez. Oh, uttered Peckerman. At this point, no one anywhere had reason to feel stupid ever again. A few silent seconds later, we were in Havana, where every rebel soldier jumped out before the trucks even came to a complete stop. Because it was still morning, the city square known as Plaza Vieja was relatively empty of shoppers and tourists. This was good, as it was Ramon's wish that no innocent bystanders become casualties, as their beef was with the people inside the big buildings at the heart of the promenade. The objective was to stealthily go through the doors and seize control of the government without firing even a shot. Peckerman and I liked that part of the plan very, very much, the not getting shot part, but there were no guarantees. Any suggestions, asshook? Peckerman asked as we were at the front of the pack, heading up the stairs to what is called El Capitolio. Let the others pass us, I told him. No reason for you and me to be the first ones in that building. So we slowed down, and needless to say, that proved to be a wise decision, because as soon as the rebels opened those doors, they were greeted by fusillades coming from the guns of fully armed Cuban soldiers awaiting their arrival. Who tipped them off about this quote-unquote secret raid was a debate. Peckerman and I didn't wish to have at that very moment, as the steady gunfire coming from the inside of the government building was sending rebels flying backward to the point where the marble steps we just climbed were becoming littered with their bodies. So Ramon then ordered the rest of the troops to retreat, to not enter the building, so no more brave young men would sacrifice their lives for what had suddenly turned into a suicide mission. The rebels were outnumbered, outarmed, and betrayed, So Ramon felt their next move should be to recede back into safety at the perimeter and regroup. "Now what, shit sniffer?" asked Peckerman. "Run as fast as you can," I said. "No reason to be the last ones to get away from this building." And because Peckerman and I now outran all the other rebels back toward the perimeter, we didn't realize it when we veered toward the left side of the esplanade that everyone else would be peeling off to the right, heading toward a small park at the far end of the promenade that was out of the line of fire. No big deal, I figured. When we stopped running and saw what had happened, we'd just circle around and meet up with everyone else. So we took a couple of steps in their direction when suddenly all the doorways filled with Cuban army soldiers emerging from the buildings, their weapons still drawn, looking out at the promenade for any more living rebels they could make an example of. They saw none, except for me and Peckerman. And while some of them dropped to a knee and took aim, the greater majority started running toward us, so we broke into a run, not in a straight line, but rather in an arc, to where Ramon and Nunez and the rest of the rebel army were still crouched hiding. Still in crouched hiding. But then the entire Cuban army started running in the direction we were heading. I never ran so fast. Not even as a soccer referee who no longer required corrective shoes. But still, I was used to the exertion, so my stamina, fueled by the torrents of adrenaline that were now coursing through my system, made it easier for me to sprint toward our comrades, as opposed to Peckerman, lumbering buffoon that he was, who looked as if he was going to have the incredibly rare life experience of actually seeing his heart burst through his chest, given the seismic breaths he was expelling. I reached the other side first. Though panting heavily, I rejoined the other rebels, so now I too was out of the sight of the Cuban army, who now started shooting at Peckerman, who was only about 20 feet away from us. What did I feel when I realized that he would probably not make it? Nothing. Under these circumstances, there was simply no time to indulge any emotions. What we needed was action. So, as if I'd shifted into a gear I didn't even know I had, I took a deep breath and yelled at the top of my lungs, "Secure the radius!" Whereupon all the rebels, including Ramon and Nunez, stood up, forming a line from the edge of the perimeter to the midpoint of the promenade, and started firing at the unsuspecting soldiers who were running right toward them. As an exhausted Peckerman collapsed onto the safe ground behind this cordon, the rebels unloaded everything they had, and when the shooting finally ceased, all the enemy soldiers were dead. "El Horco, Senor Peckerman," said a jubilant Ramon, who somehow figured that this was all done by design. "We would be honored to have you lead the way." So me and Peckerman moved up to the front of the pack, walked across the esplanade, up the marble stairs, entered El Capitolio, and took it over. Chapter 36, Jeffrey. I have been to some pretty wild parties. I was at a wedding once where at around the 3-hour mark in the reception, the best man went up to the band leader and requested Horse with No Name. And the band leader said he was sorry, but the band didn't have that particular tune in their repertoire. And the best man, a large individual, picked up the band leader by his tuxedo jacket and said, "It's 2 fucking chords." That was all the encouragement the band leader needed. The band started playing a half-assed version of A Horse with No Name, at which point the back door to the reception hall burst open, and the rest of the groomsmen came in leading an actual horse. I still don't know where they got it. The reception hall was in Weehawken, New Jersey, which is not exactly the frontier, but wherever they found it, the horse was funny as hell, at least at first. After a while, the groomsmen got tired of holding it and went back to the bar. Which meant the horse is just wandering around unsupervised. He almost forgot it was there. You'd be going to take a leak, and you'd see it grazing on the buffet lasagna, and you'd go, "Oh yeah, the horse. Finally, the owner of the hall showed up, and as you can imagine, he was pissed. He wanted the horse out of there, and he wanted more money. And the father of the bride, a lawyer, was shouting that there was nothing in the sales contract that said you couldn't have a horse. Finally, the police came, and they were trying to grab the horse. But the groomsman lifted the groom onto its back, and the horse threw him off, breaking his collarbone. And the horse started freaking out. Barging around, knocking over tables, and the bride and her mom were screaming, and it basically turned into a riot. A bunch of people got arrested, and the father of the bride got tasered. That's when I left. I never did hear what happened to the horse. I do know the marriage lasted less than a year. My point is, I've seen some parties, but I never saw a party like the ones the Cubans put on the night we won the Battle of Havana. We wound up eating a victory meal in a huge marble floor room with potted palms around the sides and a big long table in the middle. Every guy at the table had a bottle of rum and a glass in front of him. Guys were getting up and giving speeches in Spanish, and at the end they'd hold up a glass and yell, "Secure the radius!" We'd all stand up and gulp down the rum, and then, here's where the party went to the next level, guys would fire their weapons at the ceiling. Of course, the bullets ricocheted right back down, which you might think would put a damper on the shooting. But that's because you've never partied with Cuban revolutionaries who've just overthrown a regime. What they did as soon as they toasted the radius and squeezed off some rounds was dive under the table, which fortunately was a hardwood. I'm guessing walnut. We'd all be crouched under there laughing like maniacs with bullets hitting the table above us and the floor around us. It was probably still risky, but after the 7th or 8th glass of rum, nobody gave a shit. Speaking of which, I still had diarrhea. You'll see in a minute why this was important. I think it was from that quesadilla de harina de yuca rellena con camarones y queso crap. All I know was, all of a sudden, I needed to get to a toilet, so I stood up to leave the table. When the Cubans saw this, they thought I was about to make a speech, so they all stood up. So I waved my arms like, "No, no, no." And they all waved their arms, "No, no, no." So I pointed to my ass to indicate that I had a medical condition, and they thought this was hilarious. They all pointed to their asses, and then they all started yelling, "Yee!" And then some idiot yelled, "Secure the radius!" I knew what was coming next, so I started running for the door. I got maybe 3 steps before somebody tackled me. And if you have been following this story, you know by now, there's only one asshole who would be asshole enough to be the asshole in question. "It's not safe out here," he's yelling. Like I didn't notice the bullets bouncing all around us. "I know that, fucknut," I informed him. "I have to get to a bathroom." And he goes, "Oh, dipshit." So he gets off me, and now we're both running toward the doors at the end of the hall. There were a few stray bullets still pinging around, and the Cubans were still under the table, so I don't think they'd noticed yet that we were missing. As I ran through the doorway, I thought I saw the potted plant palms on either side moving, but I was concentrating on getting to the toilet. Suddenly, wham! The door slammed shut behind us. I looked back and saw why the palms had been moving. The salamanders. 2 of them were wrapping a chain around the door handles to lock in the Cubans. The others grabbed Horkman and me, picked us up, and started running. I tried to explain that I needed a bathroom, but they weren't listening. They hustled us down some stairs and through some hallways, and then all of a sudden we were outside in an alley. There were 2 cars waiting there, old American ones. The salamanders threw us into the back seat of one, and we took off. It was nighttime. They drove on side streets with the lights off. What's the meaning of this? Said Horkman, because that's the kind of asshole thing he says. The oldest salamander, the leader, looked back from the front seat. The meaning of this is, you fucked up. What are you talking about? Said Horkman. We won. Exactly. Horkman looked at me. I was right, he said. Those guys wanted the rebels to lose. I really need a toilet, I said. What are you going to do with us? Said Horkman. We're going to take you for a little ride, answered the leader, on the dildo of doom. The what? Technically, said the leader, it's the DD-2038X, a very small, very fast, very advanced nuclear stealth submarine. Officially, it doesn't exist, so don't tell anybody, okay? He smiled. Not that you'll have anybody to tell where you're going. I can't hold it much longer, I said. Where are we going? Demanded Horkman. The leader smiled again. Gitmo. Is there a bathroom there? I said. Guantanamo? Said Horkman. You can't do that. We're American citizens. What you are, said the leader, is wanted international terrorists who are about to go missing, like Osama. The car stopped in a deserted waterfront area. It was very dark. They hustled us out and onto a rotting dock. The sub was tied there, low in the water, almost invisible. They opened a hatch and shoved us down a ladder into a cramped area with a little bench. They told us to sit on it and stay there. They cast off the lines and closed the hatch. The helmsman flipped switches and worked the controls. The sub started moving. Is there a bathroom on this thing? I said. Just a minute, so the leader were diving. I don't have a minute, I said. I felt the sub going down, and then I felt something else. Something bad. I'm sorry, I said. And then a volcano erupted in my bowels. Workman, sitting next to me, smelled it first. Oh my God, he said. I couldn't answer. I was still erupting. I was the old faithful of feces, the space shuttle of shit. Oh my God, said Horkman, looking at the floor. I don't even want to tell you what was happening on the floor, other than to say it was not a color usually found in nature. Almost immediately, an unbearable stench filled the sub. It was like being sealed in the business end of a porta potty at a chili cook-off in Phoenix in July. The salamanders were gagging. Surface! Shouted the leader, his eyes watering. Now! But sir, responded the helmsman, we're still in the... Take it up right now. The helmsman yanked on levers. The sub shot up. The salamanders were already opening the hatch when we reached the surface. Some water splashed in as the salamanders scrambled up the ladder and out. Horkman was right behind them. I was right behind Horkman. I stuck my head out the hatch and sucked in a breath of air. We had popped up in Havana Harbor near some big ships, freighters. The salamanders were on the front end of the sub, lying down, retching and puking into the harbor. Psst, said Horkman. He actually used that word. Psst. He was crouching at the back of the sub, waving at me to go that way. Come on, he whispered. And he slid off the deck into the water. I wasn't crazy about the idea, but I also wasn't crazy about staying with gung-ho maniacs in a diarrhea-filled submarine, even if it was my diarrhea. So as quietly as I could, I slid into the water after him. We swam toward the closest freighter, and spotted an opening almost at water level toward the back. We climbed up the ladder there and found ourselves inside what looked like the ship's garbage collection area, which smelled almost as bad as I did. We followed a corridor into the ship, found an empty cabin, and ducked inside. There were some hanging bunks, and we decided we'd spend the night there and figure out what to do when it was daylight. Horkman made me take off my pants and throw them out the porthole. We collapsed on the bunks. I fell asleep in maybe a minute. When I woke up, sunlight was coming through the porthole. and the ship was moving. Chapter 37, the NBC Nightly News. Brian Williams. Good evening. Our top story tonight again comes from Cuba, where the extraordinary events of the past 2 days have taken yet another astonishing twist. It now appears that the military masterminds behind the astonishing lightning strike revolution that overthrew the Cuban regime were, of all people, Philip Horkman and Jeffrey Peckerman, the New Jersey-based international terrorists, believed to be responsible for the recent attacks in New York City and the hijacking of the cruise ship Windsong, including the traumatic assault on Charo. For more on this remarkable development, we go to NBC correspondent Richard Hanft in Havana. Richard, what exactly is the connection between the rebel forces and these wanted terrorists? Hanft. It's not clear, Brian. The rebel leaders claim they had no prior contact with Horkman or Peckerman, yet somehow the two men were able to evade capture by the Cuban authorities, locate the secret rebel headquarters, take charge of the insurgent army, and lead the attack on Havana, achieving an astonishing victory by means of a highly unorthodox and innovative military tactic called the radius. Williams. The radius? Hanft. Correct, Brian. The rebels say their victory was totally the result of this innovative maneuver, led by these two apparently very charismatic men. And in yet another strange twist, Horkman and Peckerman apparently vanished only hours after the battle ended. 1 minute they were at a victory banquet here in Havana, and the next minute they were gone, disappearing in the words of the Cuban rebels, like fantasmas de la noche, or ghosts of the night. To add to the mystery, early today, the Cubans found a top-secret American spy submarine floating in Havana Harbor with a team of commandos clinging to the hull. Apparently, the submarine had been disabled by some kind of powerful biological weapon. Williams. Could this also be the work of Horkman and Peckerman? Hanft. The Cubans believe so, Brian. The American government has no official comment on the sub, but sources have told me the Pentagon is deeply embarrassed that Horkman and Peckerman were able to neutralize an elite commando unit apparently sent here to capture them. Williams. For more on the U.S. reaction, we go to NBC Washington correspondent Jeffrey Berkowitz. Jeffrey, what is the American government saying now? Berkowitz. Brian, officially Horkman and Peckerman are still wanted as terrorist enemies of the United States, but their role in the Cuban revolt has caused many here in Washington to reevaluate these shadowy figures. There is speculation that they may actually be some kind of super double agents, if you will, posing as terrorists, but actually using their international clout and their formidable abilities to advance a different agenda altogether. Williams. What agenda is that? Berkowitz. Nobody knows for sure, Brian, although some are now calling them freedom fighters. The singer Bono is strongly hinting that he has been in contact with them, as are Geraldo Rivera and the Nike Corporation. And in an indication that the public image of these fugitives may be changing here in Washington, we're already seeing young people wearing t-shirts like the one I'm holding here, with the words Fantasmas de la Noche above the faces of Horkman and Peckerman. Williams. That's Horkman and Peckerman? Berkowitz. I'm told these are their bar mitzvah photos. Williams. Fascinating. And does anyone have any idea where these two are now? Berkowitz. Apparently not, Brian. They have indeed vanished like ghosts in the night. They could be literally anywhere on Earth. But wherever they are, it's a good bet, based on their track record, that excitement is not far behind. Williams. Excitement is definitely the word for these two. Chapter 38, Philip. Thank me, Horkman. Get off of me, you bloated mammal. Only if you thank me first. Not a chance in hell. Then I'm not budging. Ow! I was in great pain. I was on the floor. Peckerman's knee was in my back, and his grubby hands were under my chin, yanking my head upward in the general direction of Saturn, with the promise that he would not stop doing this until I said thank you. And there lay the problem. Call me arbitrary, but I truly felt I had to draw the line somewhere. Again, we were at sea. It was our first morning. After a surprisingly good night's sleep, my eyes opened to the disorientation of not recalling where I was, lying in what was, for all intents and purposes, a hammock hanging from the ceiling near the bowels of what were, for all intents and purposes, bowels. A corridor filled with waste being swept along by waves of tainted liquid toward a huge opening at the far end. It was about that time when I saw two rodents lying on their backs on top of a flattened Dixie cup as if in a water park, when I heard Peckerman approach from behind, demanding that I thank him for getting us where we were. Why in God's name should I thank you for that? Because otherwise we'd still be inside that submarine. So you're asking me to thank you for having diarrhea? Yes. No. And why not? First of all, it was involuntary. It's not like you had a brilliant strategy that you implemented and it affected our escape. You simply got sick at an opportune time. And secondly, from the looks of things, I said, well, I could have sworn that one of those floating rodents had fed the other one some grapes. I'd say, at best, this was a lateral move. That's when he knocked me to the floor and started hurting me. Funny thing, though, while Peckerman was snapping my head backward and forward like I was a giant Pez dispenser with colored candy issuing from my neck, it did cross my mind that we were indeed lucky to be away from those angry salamanders who were going to take us to Guantanamo, where, as presumed terrorists whose objective was to destroy America, we'd be thrown into dark cells and waterboarded. So, being here on this freighter, despite not knowing exactly where we were or where we were going, was a reprieve from what I was certain would be my fate. The country that I love hating me so much that when I died, either in prison or at the hands of a death squad that hunted me down, spontaneous parties would break out around the peace-loving world like they did when they finally found Osama bin Laden. So as much as it pained me to offer anything that even resembled positive feedback to this buffoon, I bit my lip and gave him what he so desperately needed. Thank you, Peckerman. You're very welcome, douchebag. Then the moron got up. And then I extended an arm the way football players do when they're seeking assistance getting up after they've been tackled. The way virtually every time, even the most barbaric players from the opposing teams help them up. So, as if I needed further confirmation that the Neanderthal I was traveling with was somewhere to the left of them on the evolutionary scale, I staggered to my feet unaided as he ignored my request and walked away whistling. I whistle a happy tune, still with no pants on. The freighter we were on is called a container ship, a long, flat transport that carries its cargo in rectangular truck-sized containers, stacked on top of each other by cargo cranes. This particular ship had about 75 of those huge containers filled with bananas from Ecuador, then stopped in Cuba where it picked up a smaller amount of sugar, and was now continuing on to a place that apparently needed bananas and a little sugar. They're probably green, huh? What's probably green, Peckerman? The bananas? Because if they're yellow, by the time they get to where they're going, they'll be overripe. Okay. And mushy. Uh-huh. In general, it was easy for me and Peckerman to anonymously blend in with the crew of 30 merchant marines after we stole work uniforms from the ship's laundry. And the fact that most of the men were from different countries made communicating in general a non-factor. These were veteran, tattooed seafarers who knew the jobs they had to perform and simply went about the routine. So the two of us merely did what they were doing. Whether it be swabbing, chipping paint, or operating forklifts, we insinuated ourselves into the group and worked alongside of everyone else. We also ate with them. And at night, after watching a movie in the ship's theater, or sitting in a corner of the game room pretending that we knew how to play chess. We went back to our room in those hanging bunks. But here's what I don't understand about bananas. Jesus, Peckerman, we're still talking about bananas. I mean, I've been to the supermarket, and a lot of times I've seen green bananas there. So? Well, if they're green by the time they get to the store, what color were they on the boat before they got to the store? Go to sleep, Peckerman. Maybe it's darker green. Peckerman, can't you find a shiny object that you can stare at for a while? With the exception of this idiocy, it was an easy routine to settle into, and all seemed to be under control until our third day out. Dinner. A bowl of unrecognizable sludge that everyone merely withstood, but Peckerman scarfed down like he was on death row. So down, I said under my breath. Peckerman, our fellow mariners affectionately call what you're shoveling into your pie hole SWAT, which in this instance stands for shit with a lot of thorns. Fuck 'em, I'm hungry, Peckerman declared at the same unfortunate moment that a sneeze with the force of a tsunami sent a mouthful flying across the table and into the face of a Dutch seaman who was crying because he just found out his sister died. I knew Peckerman was in big trouble when everyone at the table fell silent in deference to their splattered comrade before the guy to Peckerman's right grabbed him from behind. And then I knew I was in big trouble when the guy to my left, parentheses, wrongly thinking Peckerman and I were friends, close parentheses, grabbed me from behind. They pulled us to our feet and dragged us to the center of the room, where the rest of the crew formed two lines to take turns punching us in the stomach. "Him first!" I heard Peckerman yell, at which point the guy in the front of that line clenched his fist and belted him with power that caused him to keep bowing at the waist like it was sundown at the Western Wall. And then it was my turn. I looked at the guy who was about to punch me. He was small, Asian, sort of pudgy. Sort of reminded me of what I would look like if I was small, Asian, and pudgy. What I mean is, he didn't seem like he was used to this kind of thing, but that he was aware that the other seamen from both lines were watching, and this scared me, because from the look on his face, I could tell he felt he had something to prove to them, especially when fueled by the cheering that was egging him on in at least 4 languages that I was able to discern. His look seemed to say he was sorry, but this was something he just had to do. So I closed my eyes and braced myself for the ensuing impact when I suddenly heard a word I never imagined I'd hear in my life. It came from an officer rushing into the mess hall and shouting in a voice that cut through the mounting chorus of the others, causing them all to stop cheering, to break ranks, and scatter in all directions. "Pirates!" Chapter 39, Jeffrey. It didn't register with me right away, the pirates thing. I was focused on the fact that my stomach hurt like a mother, and a whole crew of assholes were waiting their turn to punch me. I knew I had to think of something fast. This is going to sound weird, but my mind flashed back to Artie Burmett. He was this bully in 8th grade who used to take my lunch money and give me wedgies, stuff like that. One day he roughed me up pretty good after school. When I got home, I was crying. My mom asked why, so I told her, and that night she told my dad. My dad was the kind of person who never backed down from a fight, even when the other person didn't want to fight, if you know what I mean. He got thrown out of a lot of bars in his day, and at least 2 funerals. One time he punched a cassowary. Google it. It's a giant flightless bird, bigger than an ostrich, with a weird head and huge Tyrannosaurus Rex feet. The way it happened was we were at this wildlife tourist attraction in Florida called Jungle Adventure, and we went to a bird show in an outdoor theater where, for the big climax, the guy chosen from the audience holds up a plum so a parrot can swoop down from the back of the theater and snatch it from his hand. At least that's what the announcer says is going to happen. What really happens is, while the guy is looking up at the parrot, a totally unexpected and fugly bird the size of Shaquille O'Neal comes barreling out from backstage and grabs the plum. Then what's supposed to happen is the victim, totally surprised, lets go of the plum, jumps back, maybe even screams a little. The audience has a big laugh, and the cassowary, swallowing the plum, trots off to his trainer. That's not what happened with my dad. He jerked the plum away and threw a left hook at the cassowary's noggin that connected pretty good. The cassowary totally freaked out. Things got hairy then. Workers trying to restrain this huge, pissed-off bird. People running for the exits, a lot of screaming. When things finally calmed down, the trainer tore into my dad about how this was an extremely rare and valuable animal, and he could have killed it, and for that matter, he could have killed him. And what the hell was he thinking? My dad's position was, fuck you, and I'm keeping the plum. Now that you know what kind of guy my dad was, you probably know what he did when he found out about Artie Burmett. First, he smacked me in the head hard for crying like a girl. Then he said, next time that punk starts with you, you hit him hard, right in the nose. If I find out you chickened out, I'll beat the living shit out of you myself. So the next day, when Artie Burmett came to my locker and told me to give him my lunch money, I hit him hard, right in the nose. And you know what happened? I'll tell you what. Artie Burmett beat the living shit out of me and pissed in my locker. It's a lesson I never forgot. This flashed through my mind when the crew started hitting me in the stomach. Artie Burmett flashed through my mind, not the cassowary. I included that here just for background. Close parentheses. I knew there was only one way I was going to get out of that ship alive, and that was to fall on the floor and cry like a girl. If you think I'm a coward, you can eat me. So I dropped down and curled up on the floor, eyes closed, whimpering, expecting to get yanked back to my feet or maybe kicked. Instead, I heard this commotion, and then Horkman shook me and said, "Get up! We're being attacked by pirates." I opened my eyes and said, "What the fuck do you want me to do about it?" He said, "We need to help repel the attack." Those are the actual words he used, repel the attack. I said, "Why? So these assholes can get back to punching us? It's better than getting keelhauled by pirates." They didn't answer that because I didn't want Horkman to know. I didn't know what keelhauled meant. Well, it sounded enough like cornholed that I had a pretty good idea. When you think about it, a lot of pirates are probably gay. Look at Johnny Depp. We went up onto the deck where most of the crew were gathered along a side rail. We joined them and looked down into the ocean. Next to our ship were 2 speedboats carrying a dozen or so dark-skinned guys with guns. They were putting ladders against the side of our ship. Our crew didn't seem to be doing anything about this. In fact, our ship was no longer moving, which made it even easier for the pirates. It's like we had a big sign that said, "Welcome aboard." Horkman turned to the crewman next to him, a Dutch guy, and said, aren't we gonna repel them?" "Do what to them?" said the Dutch guy. I said, "He means, why don't we fight them?" "They have guns." "Don't we have guns?" "Yes, a few," said the Dutchman. "But if we shoot them, they shoot back at us and somebody gets hurt." He spat on the deck. "Nobody wants to die for this piece of shit." The pirates were climbing over the rail. They waved their guns and yelled at us to line up, move inside, and sit on the floor. They left a couple of guards watching us, then went out. Pretty soon we felt the ship moving again. We'd been sitting there for a couple of hours when 3 pirates came in, including one who I figured was the leader. He walked around the room looking at the crew. When he got to me and Horkman, he stopped and looked at us hard. He said something in a foreign language to his 2 lieutenants, and they all laughed. A chill went down my spine, or up my spine, whichever way is meant. I whispered to Horkman, I bet these maggots are picking out somebody to kill Hall. He said, you're disgusting, you know that? I said, I'm disgusting. They're the ones looking to slam some ham. He said, what are you talking about? I didn't answer because the pirate leader was now standing right over us. I frowned, trying to look as unattractive as possible, but you never know with these perverts what turns them on. A lot of them like back hair, which unfortunately I have a lot of. Once for our anniversary, Donna gave me a gift certificate for laser hair removal, but I quit after 2 treatments, so all they cleared out was a patch of skin about the size of a business card, which Donna calls my mosquito landing zone. The pirate leader pointed at me and Horkman. You two, he said, stand up. We stood up. I kind of edged behind Horkman so they would pick him. I'd made my mind up what I was going to do if these savages tried to violate me. I was going to cry like a girl and beg for mercy. Allow me to introduce myself, the leader said. He spoke pretty good English for a savage. My name is Ali. You are Mr. Horkman and Mr. Peckerman, am I correct? Horkman and I gave each other a what the fuck look. Horkman said, how do you know who we are? Ali smiled. John Stewart. John Stewart, said Horkman. Yes, said Ali. You're regulars on the Daily Show. Not you in person, of course. Your photographs. John's been doing a very funny running bit about 2 Jewish men from New Jersey being wanted international terrorists on the run, having to eat freeze-dried Chinese food on Sunday night, and so on. You're also mentioned regularly on Letterman. And Jimmy Kimmel, said one of the lieutenants. We watch on satellite, said Ali. And of course, we're among your many Facebook followers. Facebook, said Horkman. You're huge, said Ali. Bigger than Snooki, said the other lieutenant. In any event, said Ali, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. It would be my honor to offer you more comfortable accommodations, as well as transport to your ultimate destination, which I gather is Beirut. Beirut, said Horkman. I assume so, since that's where the ship was bound. I said, so you're not going to keelhaul us? Ali laughed. Very funny, he said. Like we are Pirates of the Caribbean, huh? Parentheses, so it's true about Johnny Depp. Close parentheses. In all seriousness, continued Ali, despite our image in the Western media, we are modern businessmen. We detain the ship. The insurance company pays us, let us say, $20 million. We release the ship. The insurance company uses this as an excuse to increase its rates, thus making a tidy profit. The ship owners use that as an excuse to increase their rates. It's win-win-win. Horkman, solidifying his title of world's biggest asshole, said, but isn't it wrong? Ali looked at him for a few seconds and burst out laughing and said, you have me for a second there. They moved us up to the captain's quarters, which were decent, and gave us some food. Also, they had Cuban rum. We hung out there, mainly sitting around. Every now and then, Ali would stick his head in the door and shout, but isn't it wrong? Then he'd crack up. A few hours later, we were approaching the coast of Africa. Chapter 40, Philip. You know that expression bucket list, when people write down things they like to do or the places they would like to visit before they die? Before they kick the, pardon my language, bucket. Well, being a man who always considered himself blessed and was eternally grateful for the good fortune that life has afforded me and my glorious family, I was never desirous of doing more than I'd already done, as I thought it would be greedy. So as far as I was concerned, if the good Lord deigned that my time in this life should come to an end, with the possible exception of not having the opportunity to ask Francis Ford Coppola what he was thinking when he made Godfather 3, I would pass away, wanting nothing, and with no regrets. Until now. Until Peckerman started drinking the rum that the pirates placed on the table in the captain's quarters, and until it induced him to start singing the pirate song, I used to sing along with the other kids on the bus that took us to day camp the summer between 3rd and 4th grade. 15 men on a dead man's chest. The song that all of us had outgrown and no longer sang the summer between 4th and 5th grade. Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. So it was at that exact point that my bucket list was created, with only one item on it, which was to take karate lessons and have the sensei teach me how to thrust my hand into Peckerman's chest, remove his heart, and throw it at him before he died. "Shut up, Peckerman," I told him. "I'm warning you, Peckerman." The door opened again. Ali leaned in again, shouted, "But isn't it wrong?" again, and laughed as hard as he did the first time again. And when Peckerman stopped singing and joined him with a ridiculous laugh of his own, I started wondering if that sensei could teach me how to extract my own heart and throw it at myself. "What's your problem?" Peckerman asked after Ali left. "My problem, Peckerman? My problem is that no matter how they describe themselves as businessmen, these pirates are ruthless people, and you're acting like we're on a ride at Disney World." "Yeah, but they think we're just as ruthless, so why not kick back and enjoy ourselves a little? I think we deserve a little R&R, considering what we've been through," he said before taking still another swig. R&R, I asked. "Oh, we deserve a little RXR, considering what we've been through," he said before taking another swig. "RXR, I asked. "Rest and relaxation." "That's R&R, you moron. RXR is a railroad crossing." He took another gulp, which emptied his bottle. He then picked up the untouched one meant for me and emptied about a third of it into that bottomless gullet of his. "I have a great idea," he then shouted. At least that's what I think he said, as he was now slurring like a cast member of Jersey Shore. "What's your great idea?" "Well, this boat is carrying bananas, right? About 12 tons. Then what do you say I mix some of them with this rum and make us a couple of banana daiquiris?" I didn't even answer. All I knew is that I couldn't bear to be in the same airspace as him anymore, so I left the captain's quarters and went outside. It was night. I looked out as we bore down on what I assumed was the coast of Somalia when I heard a voice cutting through the darkness. "Why not join me?" It was coming from above. I looked up and saw Ali, who motioned for me to climb the small ladder that connected the deck I was on to an upper level. I did, and now found myself on the bridge where Ali was piloting the freighter. "Nice night," he said. "Balmy," I answered, nodding. "Balmy?" It was the nerves talking, had to be. I'd never used the word balmy. Only the weatherman used the word balmy, but now I did too, and in front of a pirate, no less. He said nothing for a few minutes as his look remained fixed on wherever he was steering the freighter. He seemed lost in thought. The silence was awkward, especially when he shook his head. "I wouldn't call it balmy," he finally said. "I think it's more temperate." I'm a Jew from New Jersey who was standing on the deck of a freighter talking about the weather with a Somalian pirate. Though I'm not much of a mathematician, my guess is that the odds against that ever occurring were off the charts. "Really? I don't know about that," I told him. "Why not?" "You feel that little breeze? I think that little breeze is what makes a temperate day become a balmy one." "Temperate plus breeze equals balmy?" he asked. "Absolutely." He nodded his head in a way that meant he'd heard what I said, but didn't necessarily agree with it. But our meteorological discussion came to an end when he pushed a button on the panel, and I no longer heard the sound of engines. "Ever operate one of these?" he asked. "Of course," I said with a laugh that also said, "Please don't insult me with questions like that." "Well, we're going to let this drift to those waters over there," he said, pointing to a place a few hundred yards or so off the shore of Mogadishu. He told me the plan was to let it sit there until the ransom was paid. and then we'll have Hamas get you to Beirut. Much appreciated, I said, simultaneous to my large intestine dropping to a place about an inch above my ankles upon hearing that I'd be spending time with Hamas. The door of the bridge opened. It was Peckerman holding a tray upon which sat a dozen cups filled with liquid he insisted were banana daiquiris. I took one, drank it, and thought it tasted like wet banana cement. Ali loved it, drank it, loved it, and asked if he could offer the rest of the drinks to the other pirates. So Peckerman handed him the tray, and, confident that I'd indeed operated a freighter, Ali told me to keep an eye on things and said he'd be right back. My God, your breath could melt a fire hydrant, I told Peckerman. Do you plan to ever stop drinking? You're reeling drunk. Reeling? Is that so, Mr. Bow Wow Meow Tweet Tweet Pet Shop owner? Jesus, Peckerman. Well, for your information, I don't even know how to reel. At which point, as if a fly fisherman cast him outward, he reeled backward and grabbed the handle of the open door behind him. And then, as if that same fly fisherman reeled him in, he pitched forward, slamming the door shut, and kept his downward trajectory, which caused his face to hit the button which restarted the freighter's engines before his entire body came to rest on the control board itself, more specifically on top of the lever which put the ship in a full throttle. Peckerman, we're supposed to be drifting, I shouted to his inert mass. I looked out the front window of the freighter and saw the coast of Mogadishu drawing closer. I first tried rolling Peckerman off the control board like he was a huge blob of dough, which indeed he was. But that proved futile, as the lever itself was caught between two buttons on the idiot's shirt. So even when I rocked him and got a good momentum going, he couldn't roll completely off as he was now virtually tethered to that throttle. I then attempted to slide Peckerman off the board by grabbing his ankles and tugging in small heaves. The downward slant of the panel helped a little, but even gravity, as great a force as it may be, wasn't able to prevent Peckerman's chin from hitting what I gathered was an important red button as a lot of horns started blaring. As loud as they were, however, they were no match for the banging on the door made by an enraged Ali, who just returned with the tray and was less than pleased to see that the freighter was maybe a minute away from making a personal appearance upon the shore of Somalia. And though I tried my best to let him in, the door's lock was jammed, and no amount of ranting and pointing by Ali through the door's window, trying to convey what to do, seemed to work. So about the same time that Ali stopped banging on the door and took his pistol out of his belt, I took hold of what I figured was the steering wheel and turned it all the way to the right, with every hope that its forward motion would be stopped by turning it sideways. And though I wasn't naive enough to think that the 62,700-ton vessel would turn on a dime, I held on to every hope that it would turn on a quarter or a $50. But all I succeeded in doing was to move the rudders or whatever there was underneath, whose job it was to turn a large boat. So when the freighter ran aground, about the same time that Ali shot out the window, reached inside, unlocked the door, and came racing in, their angles caused the ship to tip over on its side, sending the containers toppling from the deck and spilling about 2 million bananas, minus the ones Peckerman used for those daiquiris, onto the shore of Mogadishu. Chapter 41. Jeffrey. I thought Ali was going to kill us. The reason I thought this was that he was pointing his gun at us and shouting, "I will kill you! I will kill you!" I tried to point out that he didn't need to kill me, just Horkman, since he was the asshole who crashed the ship into Africa. But I had trouble making myself understood because of all the noise and confusion. The ship was leaning way the hell over and everything was sliding all over the place. Also, to tell the truth, I was pretty hammered from the rum. The ship is what saved us. Ali aimed the gun at Horkman and me, and he actually shot it. But right at that exact instant, the boat lurched really hard and leaned even farther over, and Ali fell backward right out the broken window. You know how in comics people are always slipping on banana peels, but you never see that happen in real life? So you wonder if bananas are really that slippery. It turns out they are. Ali fell onto this huge mass of bananas that had poured out of the ship and formed a pile all the way to the ground. It was a giant banana slide, and Ali went down the thing like an Olympic luge competitor, except he was holding a gun and going backward and not wearing a helmet, which was too bad for him because he had to be going 50 miles an hour when he got to the bottom of the banana pile and hit a big rock. I don't want to get graphic here, but his head exploded like a watermelon in a wood chipper. I know you think I keep harping on what a complete douchebag Horkman is, but listen to what he wanted to do next. He wanted to go down and help Ali. I'm not shitting you. He's like, my God, he's hurt. I pointed out that A, Ali had just tried to kill us, and B, even if we wanted to help him, the only thing we'd do for him, first aid-wise, was collect pieces of his brain in a baggie. For once, Horkman realized I was right. The ship was still making lurching noises, so we decided we'd better get off. It turned out that everybody else, pirates and crew, had the same idea. They were hanging a big net down the side, and we all used it to climb down off the ship. We were milling around on this rocky shoreline next to about 16 billion bananas, and what was left of Ali, when a dozen guys with guns, some kind of soldiers, came running toward us. They were yelling at the pirates, who were yelling back and pointing at Horkman and me. One of the soldiers, a big guy who apparently was the leader, came over and started shouting at us. Of course, we had no idea what he was saying, so I just stood there, but Horkman held his hands out like he was the Pope and said, "Get ready. We come in peace." I looked at him and said, "Are you serious?" Apparently, the big guy was also was unimpressed because he aimed his gun at Horkman and yelled something that I assume was African for, "Don't make peaceful gestures at me, dickwad, who just turned this coastline into the world's largest fruit salad." He was really pissed, yelling and waving his gun around, and it looked pretty bad for us. I was edging sideways, trying to get behind Horkman in case the big guy started shooting, when one of the other soldiers shouted and pointed inland. We all turned to look. Coming toward the ship was a really skinny woman and some really skinny little kids. Behind them were more women and kids, and behind them were even more, hundreds of them, all skinny as skeletons. They had their eyes on the bananas. Some of the kids started running toward the pile. The big guy fired his gun into the air. Everybody stopped. The big guy yelled something to his soldiers. They formed a line in front of the banana pile and pointed their guns at the crowd. Some of the soldiers didn't look too happy about this, but you could tell they didn't dare disagree with the big guy. Now the big guy was yelling at the crowd, waving his gun to tell him to stay back. The women were crying, holding up their hands like they were begging, but the big guy didn't budge. More women and children were pushing in from behind. The crowd was getting huge. Everybody staring at the bananas, but nobody daring to get any closer to the guns. It was tense. Horkman whispered to me, "We have to do something." "Right," I whispered back. I figured that what he meant by do something was get the fuck out of there while the soldiers are looking the other way. I now realized this was stupid on my part, seeing as how the asshole had never once, in all the time I had ever known him, had so much as one good idea. And sure enough, he was not having one then. Instead of sneaking away from the soldiers, he started walking straight toward the banana pile. The big guy yelled something at him. Horkman kept walking. He reached the pile and picked up a banana. He turned to the big guy and said, "These people are hungry. Let them have these bananas." The big guy raised his gun and aimed it right at Horkman. He seemed to be enjoying this, wanting the moment to last. Everything got very quiet. Horkman didn't move. He just stood there holding the banana. It was like a movie, except it was real. Horkman was about to get killed. You know, sometimes in life something happens that makes you see things real clearly. For me, this was one of those times. Standing there, looking at Horkman, who didn't even know these starving people and yet was about to get himself killed trying to help them, I suddenly realized something very significant about myself. Specifically, I realized that this was an excellent opportunity to get myself the fuck out of there. I took one baby step backward from the big man, then I took another baby step, then another, then I farted. Sometimes you just don't see them coming. This was a real pants blaster, maybe 4 seconds in duration. The big man spun around, saw me moving, and swung the butt of his gun right into my stomach. I went down at his feet like a sack of gravel. I'm still not 100% sure what happened next. As best as I can recreate it, the timeline was as follows. 1. The big man resumes getting ready to shoot Horkman. 2. As a result of the severe blow to my stomach, I puked maybe a quart of semi-digested banana daiquiri directly onto the big man's combat boots. 3A. The big man looks down to see what the hell is happening. At exactly the same moment that 3B. I lurch violently upward to get away from the puke spatter, which means that 3C. The top of my skull slams into the big man's chin. 4. We both fell down. Me with a sudden nuclear headache. And the big man out cold. So I'm lying on the ground, holding my head and going, shit. Meanwhile, with the ranking officer unconscious, the soldiers didn't know what the hell to do. Some of the women and children in the front of the crowd are inching forward toward the bananas. Some of the soldiers lower their guns, but some don't. The crowd comes a little closer. A couple of the soldiers are shouting at the crowd and waving their guns. It looks like they're about to shoot. Then Horkman runs past the soldiers, so now he's between them and the crowd. He faces the soldiers, standing in front of the hungry crowd, holding his banana over his head like he was the Statue of Fruit Liberty. He shouts, I swear to God, let these bananas go. For a few seconds, nobody moves. Then Workman, still holding the banana up, starts walking forward toward the soldiers. The crowd is following him. Horkman walks right between two soldiers, guns aimed. They don't shoot. A kid right behind Horkman scurries to the pile and grabs a banana. He shoves it into his mouth and takes a bite. Peel and all. That was it. The crowd stampeded in, and 30 seconds later, you could barely see the pile. There were thousands of people chomping bananas, with more coming. The soldiers didn't even try to stop them. Horkman worked his way through the mob to where I was lying on the ground. Are you alright? He said. I could tell he was really concerned. Fuck you, I said. I stood up. My skull felt like that sweaty Irish stomping guy was in there. The Riverdance asshole. My app shut down by accident, so picking up where I left off. The Riverdance asshole. I just wanted to get out of there, away from all those people. I took a couple of steps and almost fell down. Horkman grabbed me. Fuck you, I reiterated. But I don't think he heard me, because all of a sudden there was a big black helicopter over us, very low, so loud it drowned out the noise of the banana mob. I looked up and saw some guys in the doorway pointing at Horkman and me. 10 seconds later, they were coming down on ropes, 4 of them, right on top of us. 2 grabbed Horkman, 2 grabbed me. Horkman yelled, "What are you doing? Who are you?" But they didn't answer. 20 seconds later, we were being hauled up into the chopper, which was already heading out to sea. The last I saw of Africa was a couple thousand skinny people looking up at us, waving bananas, which I guess was their way of saying thanks. Chapter 42. The NBC Nightly News. Brian Williams. Good evening. They're calling it the Miracle of the Bananas. It's an amazing story from famine-stricken Africa. A story of compelling human drama and international intrigue with an almost unbelievable twist. That twist involves the 2 most wanted men in the world, Philip Horkman and Jeffrey Peckerman, the mysterious, now legendary Fantasma de la Noche, who allegedly masterminded the recent terrorist attacks in New York City before spearheading the lightning strike overthrow of the Cuban regime. After that, Horkman and Peckerman seemed to vanish from the face of the earth. Today, they suddenly resurfaced in, of all places, Somalia, where in one astonishing stroke, they struck a major blow against 3 scourges that have plagued the nation for years: hunger, corruption, and international piracy. For more on these developments, we go to NBC News African correspondent Andrew Sable in Somalia. Sable. Brian, the story began early today aboard the cargo ship Sonia, which you see grounded behind me on the Somali coast. The Sonia was bound for Lebanon, carrying a massive shipment of bananas, when it was hijacked off the African coast by one of Somalia's most feared and brutal pirates, a man named Ali. Details on what happened next are sketchy, but it appears that Horkman and Peckerman were aboard the Sonia, posing as crewmen, having apparently boarded in Cuba. Somehow they were able to turn the tables on the pirates, hijacking the ship and killing the pirate leader Ali. It appears that Horkman and Peckerman then deliberately steered the ship onto the coast, grounding it in such a way as to spill literally millions of bananas onto the shore less than 2 miles from a camp housing thousands of starving famine refugees. When word of the spill reached the camp, the refugees, mostly women and children, started walking toward the ship, only to find their path blocked by local militants who, for months, have been preventing international aid from reaching the refugees. Somehow Horkman and Peckerman, who, according to the refugee eyewitnesses I spoke to, were armed only with bananas, were able to defeat the militants and open the path to the spill. What followed, as you can see in this video, was a dramatic and heartwarming scene, as thousands of women and children, many on the brink of starving to death, were able, for the first time in weeks, to eat and to hope. Brian, I've covered a lot of stories in my day, but I don't think I've ever covered one as moving as this. Williams, incredible. And what happened to Horkman and Peckerman? Sable. Brian, they have once again vanished. Witnesses say that only moments after defeating the militants, the 2 men were whisked away in a black helicopter. Evidently, they had this operation planned right down to the second. Williams, does anybody know where the helicopter came from or where it went? Sable, not a clue, Brian. The Fantasma de la Noche, the ghosts of the night, are truly living up to their name. Williams, indeed they are, and thank you, Andrew. Meanwhile, video of the miracle of the bananas quickly spread around the world, and the response has been overwhelming. In the words of the Secretary General of the United Nations, if 2 men acting alone can do so much for so many people in such desperate need, how can we, the nations of the world, stand by and do nothing? The UN Security Council is meeting in emergency session and is expected to approve massive new emergency aid to Somalia with UN troops to ensure its delivery. The public response has also been extraordinary, as millions of ordinary citizens in America and abroad have flooded relief agencies with donations and offers of help. As for Philip Horkman and Jeffrey Peckerman, in the eyes of millions around the globe, they are now seen as heroes, almost superheroes, a fact that has put the U.S. government in an awkward position. For more on that story, we go to NBC Washington correspondent Jeffrey Berkowitz. Brian, officially Horkman and Peckerman are still tied for the title of America's public enemy number one, wanted by the feds for their alleged role in the New York attacks. But behind the scenes, according to my sources, the administration is deeply conflicted about the mystery duo. Not only have Horkman and Peckerman become hugely popular, they've achieved this popularity for stunning achievements in Cuba and Somalia that are exactly in line with official U.S. policies. As one White House source told me, we don't know what game these guys are playing, but whatever it is, they're playing it brilliantly. I'm told that the president himself wants to contact the two men, but sources tell me that nobody in the entire American intelligence community has any idea how to find them. The million-dollar question now is, will they strike again? And if so, where? Williams. Already there have been reported sightings of Horkman and Peckerman in London, Moscow, Paris, Rome, Cairo, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, New Delhi, several upscale restaurants in Los Angeles and Graceland. Although none of those reports turned out to be accurate, one thing is certain. Wherever these two men appear next, the eyes of the entire world will be on them. Chapter 43, Philip. I had never been to Asia before, but that's where the helicopter took us. Over the Gulf of Aden to an airport in the town of Aden. We were in Yemen. Pretty smart of these Yemenos, said Peckerman. Gulf of Aden, town of Aden. This way they only have to remember one name. Saves time. This was one of the remarkable things about Peckerman, that he dealt with each moment as it came along, with absolutely no residual effects from what had just occurred. As if depositing a literal boatload of bananas onto a beach, a pirate's head exploding on a rock, and being lifted into a black helicopter by 4 army guys who said absolutely nothing during a flight to a hostile country didn't matter or happen. On the one hand, I envied him because I was a nervous wreck. On the other hand, I knew he was displaying the behavior of the true sociopath that he was. The same way Jeffrey Dahmer would go to a movie shortly after he ate the limbs of a young man he'd been dancing with the night before. The army guys showed up to an awaiting limousine at the edge of the small landing strip. Standing next to its open back door was a Middle Eastern man who was dressed the way Middle Eastern men dress. "Welcome to Yemen, Mr. Horkman," said the man before shaking my hand for a very long time, then grasping my elbows for an equally long time, then hugging me to the right and then to my left. Then it was Peckerman's turn. "Welcome to Yemen, Mr. Peckerman," said the man before shaking his hand for a very long time, then grasping his elbows for an equally long time, and then hugging him to the right and then to his left. 20 minutes later, this interminable greeting mercifully behind us, Peckerman and I got into the limo and took a seat opposite the man. "Roomy," said Peckerman, looking around. I agreed. It was a rather large limo. Had a bar, television, retractable sunroof, the kind of limo used only by heads of state and suburban kids on prom night. "Mr. Horkman, Mr. Peckerman," he said as the car pulled away, "it is indeed an honor to meet you both." "The feeling is mutual, Your Royal Majesty," replied Peckerman. "Are you sure about that Royal Majesty business?" I asked under my breath. "No." "With all due respect," I finally said to the man, "what should we call you?" "Call me Ishmael," he said, with a hearty Middle Eastern laugh that seemed to last as long as his hug. But the close quarters gave me and Peckerman no choice but to laugh along with him, so we did. "Why is that funny?" Peckerman sneaked in during an over-the-top guffaw. "You know, because of Moby Dick." "Moby Dick? That's how the book starts?" Moby Dick the singing whale? Please tell me you didn't really just say singing whale. We rode the downward arc of this guy's laugh, and when calm was finally restored, I asked him to elaborate. So your name is Ishmael? Close enough, he answered. His name was Ismail Haniyeh, and he was the Prime Minister of Hamas, the political party that governs the Gaza portion of the Palestinian territories. When Ali called to let us know you were on the freighter, I dispatched that helicopter to assure your safety. Thank you, we said in unison. No, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you in advance for what you are about to help us for what you are about to do to help us settle this once and for all. You're welcome, we said reflexively, too afraid to ask what it was we were going to do or what this was that we were going to settle once and for all. When the limo suddenly left the main road, I looked out the window and saw sand and some intermittent hills made from natural rock formations, the kind of desert terrain one would expect to be traversing in an ATV as opposed to a stretch limo. Where are we going, Ismail? He looked at me and smiled. It's probably best you don't know. And why is that, I asked. For your own security. Of course, I said. This time Peckerman didn't say anything. He was too busy wetting the seat we were sitting on to be bothered with talking. It didn't really matter, though. Ismail did all the talking, telling us, or should I say confiding in us, the frustrations that the Arab governments were having within their own borders, where it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain tight grips on populations who saw the downfall of rulers like Mubarak and Gaddafi and wanted to seize control of their destinies as well, and of the trouble those nations were having with each other as enmities between militant power groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and Fatah was a constant threat to the stability of the region. However, he said they were united by one common sentiment, that Israel should no longer exist. And that's where the two of you could be of help to us, he said. Excuse me, I said. You don't want us to be suicide bombers, do you? Asked Peckerman, who then burst out crying like the day he was born, after the doctor who delivered him kicked him in the face. Calm down, Peckerman, I said, though I could hear my own voice cracking. Ismail looked at the two of us. A curious stare. I had trouble reading. It scared me even more than I already was, until he burst out laughing again. Ali told me how funny you two are, he said, and that's exactly how we would like to use you. I'm afraid I don't understand, I told him. Again, I glanced out the window and saw the same nothingness as before. I remember wondering how the driver knew where we were, given there were no signs or landmarks or anything, for that matter, to differentiate 1 mile from the next. I looked back at Ismail when he started to explain. The way I see it, Mr. Horkman, laughter is a language that transcends culture and unites people the world over, Ismail answered. And it is while people are disarmed enough to sit back and laugh that they are most receptive to whatever message is being conveyed, whether they realize it or not. It's subliminal, done in advertising all the time. Enjoy the commercial and they'll buy the product. The driver steered the limo to the right. Same thing with propaganda, he continued. Keep their attention long enough and you'll change their minds. The limo was slowing down. So our thinking is that while the entire Arab population is laughing at the comedy of two funny people, two funny Jews no less, whose message is that Israel is the common enemy. It won't be too long before everyone unites and jihad can begin. Jihad? I whispered to Peckerman. What the fuck? He whispered a little too loudly. Is everything okay, Mr. Peckerman? Asked the Prime Minister of Hamas. Absolutely, he responded a little too loudly. We love jihads, he added with a raised clenched fist, which I made a mental note to shove up his butt if the opportunity ever arose. The car came to a stop next to the base of a hill. Our doors were opened by 2 soldiers with rifles who nodded their greetings and flanked us as we climbed the rocks to a flat level where we entered a cave. Dark, cold, damp. The adjectives people generally use to describe the inside of a cave. We walked farther into the belly of the mountain, turned a corner, and came upon an open area with, of all things, lights. Big overhead Klieg lights like they would have in a television studio. And cameras, 3 broadcast cameras like they would have in a television studio. What is this place? Asked Peckerman. It's a television studio, said Ismail. And why are we here? I asked. Ismail said this is where Peckerman and I would be uniting all Arab nations in laughter with our own show on the Al Jazeera network, followed by jihad. Chapter 44, Jeffrey. I'm not saying I'm Jay Leno, but I have done some television. You might have seen me if you ever caught a show I hosted called Forensic Plumbing, which ran on local cable access TV in parts of northern New Jersey. The problem was they gave me a shitty time slot. I asked for prime time like 8 p.m. on a weeknight, but the asshole station gave me, get this, 6 a.m. Sunday morning, when there's nobody in front of a TV except 3-year-olds and drunks passed out from Saturday night. Here's some of the shows that had better time slots than I did. Candle Dipping for Seniors, which was 1 solid hour of this guy who talked like Mr. Rogers on Quaaludes, dipping a string into a pot of hot wax over and over and over and over until you wanted to just shoot the fucking television. Ask the Rhododendron Doctor, which was this guy who fielded calls from the public about rhododendron diseases. Except the public never called. All the calls were from the guy's wife, who tried to disguise her voice, like she'd try to talk in a low pitch and claim her name was Steve, but you could still tell it was her. Plus, every now and then the asshole would slip up and call her honey, even when she was allegedly a man. Compost It, which was a bearded hippie dipshit going through his neighbor's garbage cans and pointing out what they could have put in a compost pile. He'd find like a grapefruit rind and get all excited like it was the fucking Hope Diamond. The only time the show was any good was when people would come out of their houses and yell at the hippie to get away from their garbage cans. And he'd brandish the grapefruit rind at them and yell that they were raping the earth. I admit I got the idea for putting an exclamation point at the end of Forensic Plumbing from Compost It, but the guy really was a dipshit. Hilda and Gloria's Wide Universe of Books, which was these 2 fat old broads talking about a book they supposedly read that week. Only half the time you could tell neither one of them had finished it, so most of the show consisted of one of them, Hilda, I think, talking about medical complications arising from her hysterectomy, which she claimed was botched, and the other one going, oh my god, that's awful. These are the kinds of assholes who are getting better time slots than I got, which was a total joke, because Forensic Plumbing had some real meat to it. The set was me, sitting in a chair next to a potted tropical plant. I opened the show every week by breaking the ice with a couple of plumbing-related jokes, like, did you hear that somebody broke into the police station and stole the toilet? Police have nothing to go on. Then I move on to that week's Plumbing Whodunit, which would be an actual forensic plumbing case. Like, there was one fascinating case where a forensic plumber was called in to investigate how come a high-rise building got flooded. His investigation determined that a plumbing contractor had been called in to unclog a toilet on one of the middle floors. This guy ran a cable through the carrier and the 4-inch horizontal waste into the 6-inch vertical stack, where it got stuck. So the plumber, assuming the cable went down the stack, went looking for it on a lower floor, where he tried to cut into the riser with a bandsaw, but his blade got jammed. So he gave up and just left the blade there, if you can believe that, with a come-along still attached to the riser. The other end of the come-along was attached to a 2-inch galvanized cold water header in the pipe chase, which is what broke and caused the actual leak. But here's the kicker. The cable never went down the vertical stack in the first place. It got turned around in a tucker fitting and actually went up. Seriously, you can't make this shit up. Every week on Forensic Plumbing, I would take the viewers through cases like that. Midway through my presentation, to add variety and action, I'd get up from the chair and go to a dry erase board where I'd diagram some of the key points. What made that a little tricky production-wise was that my camera operator was this older Italian guy from my neighborhood, Joe Stampone, who was legally blind. To be honest, you didn't really even need the legally part. He was blind as a bat with a bag over its head. The funny thing was, he still insisted on driving, being Italian, so his wife, Marie, had to ride with him and yell, "It's turning yellow! Slow down! Now it's red! Stop the car! Stop! For God's sake, Joe! Stop!" The thing was, Joe was the only person I could find who would go with me to the studio at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, so I had to use him on the camera. He was okay when I was sitting at the desk, but when I made the move to the dry erase board, his aim was sometimes off. So if you were watching, you'd hear me talking, but what you'd see on the screen was the tropical plant. So I came up with a system where I'd signal him to move the camera by snapping my fingers. If I snap once, that meant move the camera left, and 2 snaps meant move it right. But Joe's memory wasn't much better than his eyesight, so sometimes I'd snap, and you'd hear him saying in what he thought was a whisper, "Wait, is it your left or my left?" But the point is, I had some experience in front of the camera, so when the Hamas guy, Ismail, told us we'd be doing a live international broadcast on Al Jazeera, which is a major network I have heard of, I right away had some ideas. My thought was a talk show format with me as the host, maybe opening with a monologue and interviewing guests. I saw Horkman in more of the Ed McMahon role. His job would be to laugh at the monologue, then shut the fuck up, move down the sofa, maybe get off camera altogether. I explained my concept for the show to Horkman while Ismail was talking with the TV people in the cave. I expected Horkman to argue for more airtime, but instead he told me that he didn't want to do the show at all. He didn't want me to either. "Don't you see," he said, "they're just using us for propaganda, like Tokyo Rose, because we're American Jews, and they want to..." Who the fuck is Toyota Rose? Tokyo, I said, Tokyo, you idiot. Okay, so what the fuck does Japan have to do with it? Horkman grabbed my shoulders and leaned in close. "Will you just listen to me?" he said. His breath smelled like bananas. "We cannot do this. They're going to use us to promote jihad." "So we promote a little jihad," I said. "What's the harm?" "A little jihad," Horkman said. "What's the harm?" He took a deep breath, looked at the roof of the cave, then back at me. "Listen," he said, "you have to get this into your tiny brain. We can't do this. We have to figure out a way to..." He shut up then, because Ismail was coming back. "All right, gentlemen," Ismail said. "If you'll come this way, we're ready for you on the set." He led us over in front of the cameras. It turned out the set was just an area on the cave floor, totally empty except for a dead scorpion. "You will stand here," said Ismail, "and speak into the camera." Wait, I said. "All due respect, this is not a good visual. It looks like we're in a fucking cave here." "We are in a cave," said Ismail. "Exactly," I said. "That's the problem. It's called production values. Are you familiar with an American TV show called Forensic Plumbing, by any chance?" "What kind of plumbing?" "Forensic. The show is Forensic Plumbing with an exclamation mark." "No." "Okay. Anyway, it's a show that's been on for a while, and I happen to be the producer, so I know a little something about the medium of television, okay? It's all about creating an image. Now, with this said here, the image you're creating is your cheap, half-ass operation that can't even afford a studio, that's not going to impress your viewers. They're going to tune in and see two guys standing in a shithole cave. They're going to think, this outfit can't even afford chairs. I don't want to buy whatever these losers are selling. They're going to change the channel. But if you just to set up a little, get some curtains, some nice chairs, maybe a plant and a desk I could sit behind as host, then you have some credibility. The viewers will be like, this is obviously a first-class operation. Maybe I'll give this jihad thing a try. Horkman made a sound like a bullfrog trying to give a blowjob to a buffalo. Ismail shook his head. We prefer the image of a cave. Not to stereotype, but this is exactly why these ragheads are still riding around on fucking camels. So, gentlemen, said Ismail, as I said, we want you to stand here. He pointed basically at the dead scorpion and speak to the camera. Okay, I said, but what's the format? As I said in the car, said Ismail, we just want you to be yourselves, two humorous Jewish American men, respected international terrorists, bantering in an amusing fashion, perhaps making a few jokes about how Israel is an oppressive racist state that must be destroyed. Horkman's face was now the color of a baboon's ass. Also, continued Ismail, at a certain point, which I will indicate to you by raising my hand, we would like you to read a brief statement which we have printed on a card for your convenience. He held up a white card. On it, handwritten, were these words. Someone left the cake out in the rain. What the fuck, I said. It's a code, said Horkman, to trigger the jihad. I hate that fucking song, I said. I'm sorry to hear that, said Ismail. Nevertheless, I must insist that you read it exactly as it is written when I give the signal. What if we don't, said Horkman. Yeah, I said, what if we don't? We will decapitate you on camera, said Ismail. Okay, then, I said. Not a problem. We were just curious. Very good, said Ismail. We will start the broadcast in, he looked at his watch, 90 seconds. To summarize, we want lighthearted banter, easygoing josh and camaraderie between two humorous friends, interspersed with playful references to the need to exterminate all Jews from the planet. When I give the signal, you will read the card precisely as written. If you do not, I will have to call upon these men to intervene. He nodded toward the far cave wall. Two men I hadn't seen before were standing there. They had black hoods over their heads, and they were both holding swords. Ismail said, do you understand? Absolutely, I said. Horkman didn't say anything. Excellent, said Ismail. He looked at his watch again. 15 seconds. He stepped out of camera range. Have fun with it, gentlemen, he said. You're on. Chapter 45. Philip. I had been on television only once in my life. I was 14 years old, and my parents took me and my sister into New York City to see a taping of The Price is Right. My seat was on the aisle, so if you were watching at home, you got to see the left half of my face when they showed the audience after Bob Barker yelled, "Come on down," and that contestant was actually coming on down. That was the extent of my resume as a performing artist. So when the Hamas stage manager started counting down the seconds until we were on the air, I was nervous thanks to the combo platter of performing comedy on live television, the message we were to deliver on live television, and the threat of having our heads separated from our bodies on live television by those two black-hooded gentlemen brandishing very large swords. Very large swords with very dull blades, mind you. Back in the days when my parents forced me to go to Hebrew school, I remember learning that what made a kosher chicken kosher was that it was killed with a knife so sharp that when the rabbi cut the chicken's head off, it actually felt no pain. It was that quick. But dull blades? A dull blade is used by a decapitator to make the decapitatee feel as much pain as possible when they take their time sawing his head off. Lovely. So while Peckerman and I stood there side by side looking into camera, I resigned myself to do all I could not to screw up and to be as funny as possible. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, said the stage manager before pointing to us. We were on television. Peckerman led the way, and I followed. Good evening, fellow jihadists. Welcome to Peckerman and Horkman. Why is your name first? I asked. Because I spoke first, he said. So if I spoke first, the name of our show would be Horkman and Peckerman? That's right. Then can we start the show over and I'll speak first? Peckerman looked into camera and pointed to me. Typical Jew, he said. Ismail, the stage manager, and the cameraman started laughing. How does that make me a typical Jew? I asked. Because you're whining like a Jew who doesn't get what he wants. You mean like the Gaza Strip? They laughed some more. Yes, answered Peckerman. And the left bank? I asked. You mean the West Bank, don't you? The left bank is in Paris. I know, but Jews want that too. More laughter. Really? asked Peckerman. Oh, yeah. We Jews want all the banks. Even more laughter from everyone, including, I assumed, the decapitators because their black hoods were now bobbing like turds in the ocean. Encouraged by the appreciative audience, Peckerman and I kept going. So tell me, Horkman, did you hear the one about the old Jew who was walking down the street in Nazi Germany? No, I don't think that I have. Well, this old Jew was walking down a street in Nazi Germany when a car pulls up and Hitler steps out. Hitler sees a pile of dog shit on the sidewalk, takes out his gun, and orders the old Jew to get down and eat it. So the old Jew bends down, eats some of it, looks up, grabs the gun away from Hitler, and orders him to get down and eat the dog shit. So Hitler gets down and eats some of it. Later, the old Jew went home and said to his wife, "You'll never guess who I had lunch with today." This brought the room to the brink of hysteria. Loud, sustained laughter, high fives, clapping as if they could already taste the victory that would assuredly ensue thanks to this barrage of anti-Semitic jokes. If we're all laughing, Ismail said to one of the camera, I can only imagine how jihadists everywhere are united in laughter as well. Thrilled that his instincts were correct in having me and Peckerman do this little dog and pony show, Ismail then reached down and picked up the card that had the inane lyric from that dreadful song written on it. But Peckerman and I pretended not to see it, knowing full well what the result would bring, so we stalled. You know, Horkman, there must be literally thousands of Jewish jokes we can tell on our new show. Thousands, I said. I bet there's tens of thousands. Ismail, giving us the benefit of the doubt that we hadn't seen the card, started waving it while clearing his throat to get our attention. Tens of thousands, said Peckerman. Okay, let's tell them all. Sounds good to me. But after I said that and we both turned forward, Ismail knew it was impossible for us not to have seen the card, and deduced that we were defying his orders. So he looked over at the two black-hooded gentlemen who instantly took a step toward us. Let's start by making fun of Jewish women, shall we? Exactly what we expected to happen by delaying the inevitable is anyone's guess. A miracle? One that would save both Israel and our necks as well? Probably. Yet it did cross my mind that any shot we had with the God of the chosen people intervening on our behalf was becoming less and less likely with the riddles we were now telling. What's the difference between a Jewish woman and Jell-O? Peckerman asked. I give up, I answered. Jell-O moves when you eat it. Aside from our own nervous giggles, there was no other laughter in that cave. Apparently the comedy portion of our show was over as Ismail glared at us, and the two decapitators in waiting took another step in our direction. What should we do? I asked under my breath. And when I heard the sound of my voice cracking, it scared me more than I already was. But that was nothing as compared to how scared I became about a second later, when a seething Ismail held the white card up for what I knew was going to be the last time, and Peckerman looked up and blurted, Someone left the kike out in the rain. Huh? Kill them, yelled Ismail. Pandemonium broke out as the hooded guys raised their swords and rushed toward us. Having no desire to see just how far our heads would fly before hitting the ground, we knocked over two of the cameras that were between us and the black hooded guys and started running. because the mouth of the cave was crowded with members of Hamas who we felt would be less than willing to aid in our escape. We went in the opposite direction, which took us deeper into the base of the mountain, with the black-hooded guys already bearing down on us. Good going, Peckerman. What's your problem now, Dick Stroker? Ismail said to read exactly what was on that card. And that's exactly what I did. Someone left a kike out in the rain. That's what it said. He showed us the card, Peckerman. It said cake. I'm telling you, someone must have changed it. He's right, Horkman. We changed it, shouted one of the black-hooded guys. You could both stop running now, shouted the other black-hooded guy. Are you going to stop running? I asked Peckerman while we were still running. Not a chance in hell, he said while we were still running. How about you? I may have to, I told him. Why? Because one of them has his arm around my neck, I managed to eke out as I was being forced to the ground by a forearm larger than the house I grew up in. On second thought, I may have to revise what I said about stopping, Peckerman said on his way down to the same ground. We were lying there for maybe a second before being yanked back up to our feet and pushed against the cave wall. Are you going to stand still or not? Asked the black-hooded guy who had his hand around my throat. I nodded. Then he let go of me. And how about you? The other black-hooded guy asked Peckerman. Jesus, what's that smell? He then asked. For those of you who guessed that a terrified Peckerman soiled himself again, you are right. I'll take that as a yes, said Peckerman's black-hooded guy. Then they both took off their black hoods. Who are you guys? I asked. We're with Mossad, said my guy. Mossad? Asked Peckerman. Who's that, a tailor? Mossad, you ignoramus. It's the Israeli intelligence agency, I told him. What's this all about? I then asked the commandos. We've been tracking you too, said my guy. And we did switch that card when Ismail and the others weren't looking, said the other one. Why? Because whenever a code isn't recited exactly as planned, if a single word is changed, it's a signal to the jihadists that the jihad has been aborted permanently, and they should lay down arms, my guy explained. Now we have to get you two out of here, said the other commando, before Hamas finds out that we didn't kill you.